Well, thank you so much for taking on this course. I really appreciate it, and I hope it will be worth your while. So please don't hesitate at any point in time if there's something that is unclear, or if you want more, something added, as I will say in a conclusion as well. If there's enough demand, I'm happy to add some topics. So if you haven't seen the course outline, the next video will provide you more detail on the overall course. But if you just want to, dive straight into it, please go into the tips to review this course, and there's some suggestion on some resources to print. And after, you can go into the little story on the birth of project management. So thanks again, and all the best to you, and I hope you get a lot from this.
Welcome to the course overview. So before we get started in course content, I just wanted to have a quick overview of the philosophy first. There's 5 components, if you like, that I have put together to ensure that the course is, 1, hopefully pleasant to follow, and 2, that will increase retention. So there is a practical view on concepts, real-life scenarios. So that should make the course easier to learn. So there'll be also a lot of examples for obvious reasons. It's always better to have examples. Sometimes we don't fully grasp the concept, but as soon as the example comes, yes, we see how it relates to real life. We will also show as much as possible how to simplify, how we can implement what we have learned quickly. And I think also that will make it easier to master. So something simple, easier to understand, easier to master, and then you can take it from there. I love diagrams, and I think they are a great way to communicate a concept sometimes, so there'll be a lot of those. And finally, for part 1, which is a course, and part 3, which is a standards, there will be quizzes. Now that we've put that behind us, course content, what will you learn? We'll start off with an introduction. Some suggestions that I have for you to take to the course. So for instance, there is a roadmap here, that what I call a roadmap. I know that some of you like to look ahead with what's in a course, so they like to print that or put that handy on your tablet, so you can follow where we are at and the various functionalities. But some just prefer just to take it step by step, so it will be completely up to you, but I will suggest some resources that you could print. We will review what I have called the birth of project management. So it's something that is completely personal. Don't quote me on it. It's how I imagined that the project management was born. So I've done a little story around that, and that would be a good way to introduce you to project management and how I think the various phases of project management were born. So that will lead us to the phases of project management and the various activities to project management. And after, briefly, we will provide a definition of project management and the role of the project manager. And we will finish by a quiz already. So, and then we will move on to part 1. So part 1 is the course of project management. So the structure is very simple. Project management is divided in phases. So during this course, we will just go through the phases more or less. We'll have an overview beforehand, and after we review the 4 phases, which are initiation, planning, execution, and closing. And after we'll do a review and a wrap-up. Within those phases, some concepts, topics, tools will be explained, and I just wanted to review those with you. So we won't go through the full course. I just wanted to highlight what we will cover amongst other things. So for each phase that we will review, we will discuss the phase purpose. We will provide the key components, what it means, the outcome sort on the very high level. After we review the project manager role for each one of those phases. We will review stakeholder management. That will be obviously like all topics that I'm running you through now. It will come back for different phases. We will review who are the stakeholders, we review how we can classify them, and we review an example on how to store this information and make a communication plan out of this. We will review also the project structure. We'll have a few slides around this. This is just one structure, but I think it's important sometime when you throw it into a project manager's role to understand the structure. So we'll have several examples of structure. We will review risk management. We will review risk severity, how to assess it, and we will review a very precise example of risk register. So how to structure it properly and the different types of outcome that we could have for each risk listed. We'll review scope, the importance of scope, why is it used for, how to create it, and we'll review the change control process. So that's not all as I was mentioning, but it's just to give you an idea of how the course is structured and the different type of slides you could have. So we will talk about the scheduling. I will provide some suggestions how to build a schedule. Based on this, I would also provide some suggested steps to build a schedule, different representation of a schedule, how to monitor a schedule using the MS project software, what is a critical path and how to quickly check it on the schedule. We review obviously cost and budget, which is also a very important part of project management. I will suggest a very easy way to split to get you started on the budget. I will review with you a few of those examples, very concrete, very clear. Hopefully we will review a concept called earned value, which the project management methodology like to discuss, but as you've seen, I'm just going to go back to that slide here. I'd just like to present it extremely simply initially after we go into more complex examples, but always the concept of having something practical and an example to go along with it. We will review quality management. So this is when usually you start getting to sleep, but I'm trying to make it as interesting as possible. It is quite important, but it's true that it's quite heavy to learn when you go through all these project management courses. So hopefully I have simplified it and at the same time kept it very practical and complete, I suppose. Provide a lot of information here, highlighting the ones that are really important. We'll review also obviously issue management with some slides around this and very clear example of a issue register with a template. Project meetings. So we will review also that in part 2 where I give you my proper way on how to manage project, but we'll review in part 1 here the by the book way and the different types of meetings that you can have. So there is also obviously templates that we will review and discuss. We will also discuss project reporting, which is very important to perception of a project manager. So also we'll walk through a template. We review also the closing activity. So I put closing a bit separate because it's something that is often rushed, but I'm hoping that I've provided a clear way for you to know really the key components of this, and I'll explain why it's something that you can use as an opportunity to shine as a project manager for the very reason I was providing before. It's often rushed. So if you do it properly, then I think your stakeholders will be impressed. I will provide some templates, so we've seen that. We've seen some of the templates, but there will be more. And examples. Once again, there's this, just to give you an example, there's a project management plan, which is a document the project manager creates. So I will give examples of this stuff. Exactly, take a project as an example and exactly what you should put in. And you can put more, but the starting point I think is very important. So that's it. So it's just that was just a quick overview of some of the topics that you will see. So you know, before you commit to this course, you know what you'll get more or less, hopefully, with this. So that was for part one. Part two is a framework to really take part one and really take it to the next level, to really ace it, in my view. There will be three components. The first component, we will review the project management context. What is the context of a project manager when he joins a company? What does he or she has to deal with? And after, we'll go into the framework. So the framework is not something fluffy, it's something very concrete. I will tell you exactly what you need to do. I will provide you with examples and the likes, but it's very concrete. Sorry for laboring that point, but it's not something fluffy. It'd be nice if you could do this, but it's not just do A, B, C, D. So and finally, we'll go into interview tips. So I have interviewed a lot of project managers, and I have been interviewed, obviously, as a project manager as well. And I have done the hard work, and I know what works and I know what doesn't work. So we can review this. So that's it for part two. Part three, it's around methodology. So part three, I put it towards the end so that you can see how this course fits in with the existing methodologies, if you like. PMP and Prince 2, if you haven't heard of them, they are project management methodologies. They're obviously very long, they take weeks to learn, and they have very thorough exam and the likes. So obviously I am not going to give you a PMP and a Prince 2 course, so this is not the purpose of this course. But I wanted to give you some context to show you how this course relates to PMP and Prince 2. More or less, the idea behind that was just to show you that it's more or less the same. All project management methodologies are the same. So we'll review also Waterfall and Agile. Waterfall being, by default method used for project management. I will just go that very quickly. And Agile, I will provide a little bit more information. I will show you, an example. I will also, towards the end, provide a comparison between Agile and Waterfall, the pros and cons. So if you're wondering, Waterfall and Agile, you can use both using the part one of the course, so it's just a different way to deliver the work, if you like. That's it, we only left with one question. Is this course for you? This course is for you if you want to understand project management, if you want to become a project manager, or if you want to perfect your project management skills. Now, if we go into a little bit more detail, if you like, I don't know you, so I just going to go through different levels here and see if that's a match for you. So let's say you're a beginner or layman and you don't understand project management at all. Yes, this course is definitely for you. I mean, I'll take it really from the beginning. As I was saying, I was just giving a little story on how I imagine the project management was born. So I think that you will find that very useful. So there's 3 parts in this course. So if you're a beginner or a layman, I would suggest that you start obviously with part 1, and after you do part 2, and after you do part 3. So this is for you if you're in this category. If you're intermediate, I really think you're going to learn from it as well. I'm putting all my experience in this as a coach and as a project manager, and you will, I am sure you will get something for part 1, part 2, part 3. And if you don't, then I will gladly reimburse you. I think it's part of the terms of the course anyway. Now, if you're advanced, I'm sure you could learn from this as well. I really put some effort into putting a framework together. So the part 2, I would be surprised if you don't get anything from this. But you could also get something from part 1 and part 3, I believe. So actually, I'm quite interested. If you want to have a look, this is how I would really suggested potentially, and yes here. So that's it. So we went through the course philosophy, diagrams, examples, practical view, quizzes to help you, retain information and the likes. I provide a precise description of the course content, which is, has three parts. The first part, the course itself. The second part, know how to really take it to the next level. And the third part, to give a bit of a context of this course amongst other project management methodologies. And hopefully we finally answer the question, is this course for you or not? Now just quickly some things you might want to consider for this course. So I've provided some slides in the resources, so please note that those slides don't provide the full picture. You obviously need to go through the course, and if you have access to printer, great, you can print them and put your own notes. But they are usually summaries and they don't always provide all the explanation. So please bear that in mind. There are also some, document templates. There are some register, the issue register, the risk register, the schedule example. So please don't forget to check them out as you progress, because sometimes it will help in a comprehension just to be able to have a look at them. So I just wanted to give you a couple of suggested resources to print or have handy at least. The one on terminology, so I will often go back to the same terms, and I think it's quite important if they are understood. So the terminology PDF, which is a slide that we'll see after, if you could maybe have it handy, that'll be useful. So I provide also two types of roadmaps as PDFs. One that gives you an overview of all the phases and the key components of each phase. I know that some of you like to see, the full picture, and some of you might find that very useful to have them. So please print them or have them, handy. But it's not mandatory. I know that, some of you like to take it sequentially and learn as you go. So it's not something that I can really recommend. I just say it's really down to the individual. So it's really up to you. But they are in the resources as roadmaps to this lecture. There are also some slides that you'll see that I've put down as advanced. Nice to have initially. So if you're a bit overwhelmed by all the content of this course, feel free to skip them. But otherwise, if you're up for it, if you have still some petrol left in the tank, just go through them as well. So once again, it's completely up to you as you go, or maybe going back to those slides at a later stage. So this is the terminology that I was referring to. So let's give some definitions. I promise I won't be too long, but it will be worthwhile. So product. The product is the end goal for the project. When you build a bridge, for instance, the end product or the deliverable, it's the bridge. It's what the project bridge. So you will hear me mention product. So that means what the project will give you. Deliverable. So there are components the project team will need to deliver at the end of the project. In the example of the bridge, that could be the bridge itself, but that would be also all the operation manuals for the bridge, here I give the various documents, test results and the like. So anything that the project team produces, more or less. BAU, also business as usual, if you're not familiar with this, it's part of the organization that runs all daily activities. And this is why project management was born. Because everybody was so focusing on what they were doing every day, and out of the sudden you have a large project coming in, and and everybody is busy doing their own stuff. So they have dedicated resource. So business as usual, it's the part of the company that do daily activities, and the project teams, they are focusing more on projects. So the client, customer, business, so it's a stakeholder needing the project outcome. So it's more or less for who we are working. I will use those terms. I will use business more often than client or customer. So upper management, executive team, as opposed to manager that we'll see later. Upper management, for me, it's part of the business that that are above you in a way. That doesn't mean that they are involved in your project, but it's in a broader sense. Not necessarily the working on the project, but it could be the CEO of the company. It could be an executive manager of another part of the company. And the manager, when I refer as a manager, also known as line manager or program manager for the project manager, it's your boss. If you're a project manager, is the guy above you. So when I say, look, you have to give this to your manager, or you have to give it to the business, they are different entities. Welcome to this part of the course. Okay, so don't quote me on this, please. this is probably not accurate. So but this is how I imagine, as a bit of a learning tool, how project management could have been born. So imagine there is a queen. She has leaders, but they are always focusing on their daily task, on the wars and stuff like that. So, but she still has large projects that she wants to implement. So the work is disorganized on those projects. Teams are tired. Money seems to be always running out. So she's saying, I have leaders, but that's not sufficient. I need someone really focusing on this. So we were about to witness the birth of project management. Issues: there's a large endeavor lacking coordination, monitoring, and the solution: provide a dedicated resource to manage methodically the work to completion. A project manager. I therefore make you project manager to the queen. Go and make sure things are running smoothly. Give me a call from time to time. So, thanks. I suggest that we catch up after it's all done to close things off and see if we can improve things for next time we do this. Okay, so we have a project manager already and we have our business owner. So let's see how it worked on the first project they had. First project, trial 1. The queen gave a project and the project manager was doing a lot of monitoring, was doing a lot of fixing, see what I mean, and communicating as well. And after the closure, so that's why I was mentioning before, let's catch up at the end of the project just to check how things were going. And then the queen can have the benefits of a project. So at completion, the project manager reports back to the queen as agreed. What did he say? Okay, I think we can improve on this. I was not sure what I was monitoring against. When was this all due? I didn't know. How much money did I have? I was not even sure how much money I had. It would have helped if I knew some of the stuff that could happen beforehand. Like, nobody told me about this. Who was I supposed to communicate to? And how? The queen was too busy. She didn't return the call. And what was this project all about anyway? What was the plan? Okay, well, he's lucky. The queen is quite a nice person. Say, okay, I see your point. For our next project, let's take the time to sit down and plan on how we will communicate, how we will do things. Then we can progress when we all agree on a plan. So let's have a plan first. We agree on a plan and then we progress. Let's do this. Okay. So those are the tasks that the project manager was doing before, but now he's added a couple of more tasks. He added some planning, and then there was a plan approval. So how did that go? You think? Trial number 2, second project. Let's see. Took 2 months of planning, and after the plan is presented for approval to the queen. Okay, planning is finished. It will cost you 51.6 pounds of gold, and we should be able to complete it in 26 months. Also, on a side note, we might lose 51.3% of our army in the process. I mean, this is obviously precise for one reason. There, you see where I'm getting at. So the Queen immediately said, well, all this was a waste. We don't have the money. We don't have these pounds of gold. And I can afford to wait 2 years, because it's 26 months to finish, really, to see the benefits. It is not worth it. I wouldn't approve this project if I had at least a rough idea of the cost and how long it would take. And I'd been aware of that huge risk of losing half my army. So she was not aware of the risk, and she just heard about the incredibly high cost and how long the project was. And the worst part is they have spent 2 months, so 2 months paying the project manager and all his team to come up with something that she knew she didn't want. Surely there's a better way to do it. So now the project manager goes back to her and say, okay, I suggest we do a quick assessment this time. Not this 2 months planning, 3 months planning. We do a quick assessment and give you some basic information before starting planning on our projects. You know, we can give you the high level cost, timeframes, risk, who will participate. So this way you can decide if starting the project, planning even, is worthwhile. Okay, but I have to warn you, it won't be as precise, but at least you have an idea and you can make a decision. So let's see how it went. Final trial. So before there was planning, plan approval, monitoring, fixing, communication, closure. All that was already was happening. But what they have decided this time is to add 2 steps. So notice, this is not project anymore. It's just an idea or a need. Okay, it's not a project yet. It's just, some discussion that happened. Yeah, why don't we do this? Or we absolutely need to do that. And there's an assessment. And then there is an action here. Is the project approved? So after a couple of weeks, not months, the assessment is completed as agreed. They said they'll do a quick assessment. Quick assessment completed. Cost you roughly £30. This is so just so that you can keep up. This is a final project. This is a third project, if you like. So this is why it's not £50 anymore. It's only for £30. It's a different project. It will cost you roughly £30 of gold, and we should be able to complete it in 6 months. No loss of army in the process. Would you like to go ahead? It's not a project yet. It's doing the assessment. And she said, yeah, I like this process much better. Now I have some key information before I give the go-ahead for potential projects. I realize it's not as detailed as during planning, but it is enough for me to approve or decline project proposals. Based on the information you gave me, we have a winner. Let's go ahead for this project. And notice, now we have a project. This, we don't want to call it project yet, because in the previous example it was just too long and the Queen decided we're not going to do it, so it's not a project. So anyway, yeah, okay. So now this is what we have. We have all these activities that happen, a project not being a project here, and all that project activities, and after the Queen can have the benefits. So what we can do is we can group those activities in what we call phases in project management. Because we realize that those 2 could be grouped, the blue ones there could be grouped in, let's say we call it the initiation phase. The second part that we added, we called it the planning phase. So initiation, planning. So this is how it was at the beginning. So what we do for the other activities, we split them into 2 groups. We have the execution here, and we have the closing. That was agreed at the very beginning when they said, let's agree to catch up at the end to see if we improved or not. So this is why they've improved their processes by catching up during the closure of the project. So what we have here, it's phases. So we have outline, if you like, 4 phases: initiation, planning, execution, and closing. And what we have on the left-hand side of this diagram is activities. And we have, in this case, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 activities. So some of those activities are just approvals, so say they are actually an important step, so they are there. So that takes you from an idea to a project to the benefits of the project. It could be a need, something that absolutely has to do. We don't really want to have this policy implemented, but we are being asked to have this implemented, so it's a need. But we still go through this process anyway of assessing and project and benefits. So that's it. That's my take on project management. You can see why there is these different types of phases. By catching up after the project, you can do your next project better. The execution, it's all go, go, go. The planning is, to give you a more precise idea of what the project will be like. And initiation is really to, do we even want to do this? But we will review all this. I just thought I wanted to link back that story with the next, with part 1, which is really when we start to go into more detail on this. So that's it. Let's move on to the next part of the course. So now we're facing that question. What is project management? Project management is a practice of coordinating the work of a team to achieve a specific goal at a specific time. So the reason why I have a team here is you don't really need a team. I put it in brackets. Because in my view, a project management, and not only in my view, actually, a project management can be a one person. I mean, I'm sure you've heard of these guys running a project on their own. So, but what is key here is a specific goal at a specific time. So if it's not very specific goal, it cannot really be called a project management. It's more, business as usual. And at a specific time as well, when it becomes ongoing, when it becomes something recurring, that happens every 3 months or even every year, they shouldn't be called projects. They should be given another name. It's a once-off project. So a note that the specific goal needs to be large enough or important enough to be a project. You have a business as usual team. They have something small to do. Do they need to have a whole project team with the reporting process in place and with a budget and the likes? Probably not. So it's not a project, it's just an activity that is on top. So to be called a project, it needs to be large enough. So this is just referring back to business as usual. Project team and project activity are separate from the company's business as usual resources. We'll see that sometimes they can be shared resources, but as entities they are considered separate. The role of the project manager: he or she owns the project, responsible for it. Doesn't always have all the authority, but really is responsible to get things over the line. Let's have a look at a few bullet points. So the PM, that's another acronym for project manager or project management. The project manager plans all activities, obviously with other resources, but he has the responsibility to plan. When all this is planned, coordination and prioritization of activities, reporting, communication, telling executives how things are going. Issues, that's a big one during the execution phase, as we'll see. This is the key occupation of a project manager. I mean, if you could argue if there were no issues, who would need a project manager? So this is what we do. Ensure timeframes and budget are respected. That's also a big one. As we've seen in the beginning, the story of the Queen, she was having all these activities, burning money. So someone needs to be accountable for it. Ensure sufficient quality has been applied. I mean, this is why I was saying quality is not the most popular of all activities in project management. But in my view, if you deliver something on time and on budget, and it's not good quality, or if it's not the something that the business wanted, then it's not better. So implement within constraints. For me, it's a good way to summarize the role of the project manager. There is something to implement. He or she has to implement within all the constraints, which are, time frames, budget, and the likes. So here we have a summary of what is project management and the role of the project manager. To conclude, we could draw the similarities between our life and a company's life, if you like. We all have our daily activities to do, and this is why I'm doing life coaching now as well, because the similarities with project management are so obvious. And we all have things that we would like to do, but we never get around to them because we are focusing on our daily lives, and companies are the same, and this is why they bring in project managers, so they can really focus on that, and they have to do it, and they have to do all the coordination and the likes. Otherwise, chances are it would, if it happens, it would happen at a much slower pace. Now, having said that, let's move on to part one.
So welcome to part one of this course. So part one is a full-on project management course. All the theory, but at the same time with a practical take on it. So during part one, we will review each one of those phases that we have defined during the introduction. We'll start with a high-level view, and after we will drill down into more detail for each one of those phases. So let's get started.
Okay, so let's continue where we left it in the previous in the introduction. So we have identified some activities that we grouped into phases: initiation, planning, execution, and closing. Those are phases, and we also had some activities. So just as a, just to continue, if you want, just to put it a little bit differently in a way that will help us during this course, is just a quick reminder. Initiation is, why are we doing this and can we do it? So it's a quick assessment. Nothing too precise, but at least we can make a decision there if we go ahead or not. The planning, how we'll be managing the project. There will be also the execution, where I actually do the work, action, monitoring, coordination, issue resolution, communication. It's all happening. And closing, is it all finished? Make sure that we have no loose ends, and just reflect back. Did we do this correctly? So if we put that under this representation here, and this is how we'll have that for the course. So I still have this initiation in blue because, in theory, it's not really part of project management. We saw previously the project manager was doing this assessment, but as we'll see, it's not always the project manager doing this. And those were the key activities that we had before: assessment, approval, planning approval, monitoring, fixing, communication, and closure. So this is this diagram that we'll be using in this course when we go through the various phases here. Let's get started with phase one, initiation. Before we do, let's have a quick overview of the section. We will discuss the purpose of this phase. We will discuss the project manager role in this phase. We will review the creation of a key document, which is called the project charter, and various components of this document, but more precisely we will discuss the scope, the cost, the stakeholder management. We will review the risk management, we will review the structure of the project, and then we will wrap up and provide some examples. Let's discuss the initiation phase. This initiation phase is a phase that occurs at the beginning of a project to decide if yes or not the project goes ahead. But I need to mention that this phase is optional, that sometimes this phase doesn't occur. Sometimes the decision has already been made to go ahead with this project behind closed doors. So therefore we go straight into the next phase, which is a planning phase. There are times when there is an executive, he or she has the budget, the mandate, they have to do that, and they know they have to do it, and they want to do it, and therefore they say, I want a project, and then we go into planning directly. There are some instances when it's a government change, a legislation change that has to happen, so therefore we go into planning directly and we don't do this initiation phase. It happens sometimes as a group of executives, they need to meet and discuss and decide if this project, is viable, and then this phase will happen formally. But there are some times where this phase just does not happen formally. I just wanted to mention that. So now that we've cleared up that point, we can go into more detail about this, what this initiation phase entails. So what do? We just, the purpose of this phase, in a few words, is why are we doing this and is it feasible? The key components that we need to make this decision is we need to have a look at the scope. The scope is what is this about? What are we doing? The cost and the schedule. So it could be a very good idea, but if it takes 3 years, it might not be a good idea by the end of it. And the cost might be also prohibitive, might be just too expensive. We more or less put on a business case. Sometimes the business case is being done separately by the business, but sometimes the project manager, if he is part of this phase, would assist in creating some type of a business case, look at the cost benefits and strategic goals that come out of it and see if yes or no we can go ahead with this project. We'll have a look at the key risks. Sometimes there is a risk that is just so big that the business will make the decision straight off the bat not to go ahead with this project. So for that reason, it's important to highlight the risk now. We don't want to go into planning and execution and after realize, oh, this risk is just too big and it just hits us and it just cancels the project. And then when we are reasonably confident this project will go ahead, we can start putting a project team together. We'll have a look at the key resources. If the project manager is involved, then he will assist with this, or we will start and gather resources from the business teams to put a project team together. The key outcome sought is, yes, to get approval to start the project formally. We need some type of sign-off, and we will see that we'll use a document called the project charter that is sometimes used to put all these components, all these details on the project together in one document, and we'll get this document sign off, and then we can say, yes, we covered, this project has been approved, and we can formally go into planning. Now let's review the role of the project manager. The role of the project manager in an initiation phase is optional. Sometimes, even when there is a formal initiation phase occurring, the project manager is not involved. I think that makes sense. There's no point in involving a project manager if we are not confident the project will go ahead. So in this case, the project manager will be brought in towards the end of the initiation when we are quite confident that the project will take place, and then we can build a project team around the project manager. Another thing to bear in mind is that sometimes the project manager comes from a third party, say, when the project is outsourced. So the role and the origin of the project manager will depend on the type of project, and in an initiation phase they will decide, as they decide the project team, they will also decide who they want the project manager to be. Would the project manager be part of the company, or would they be part of the third party, or maybe one project manager each? So we will review different scenario under the project structure component of this course. We talked about the project charter, and this is what we'll be reviewing next. It's, I would say, the key reason why a project manager is involved in this phase is the business would like someone to put all the paperwork for approval together. And this is where the project manager role starts with paperwork. So we bring all the components that we've seen before that form part of initiation into one document. The project charter is a document that the project manager can use to summarize the findings of the initiation phase. So you have here listed the key component of this document. The project objectives and the business case are often included in this document. So the business would state the outcome they want from the project and any benefits and why is it worth doing. We will review the scope in more detail in the following slides. The schedule at this stage will be very simple, some high-level timeframes with an end date, we'll see this with, we have some examples at the end of this slide. We will review this. The budget, we will also review which type of budget is expected at this stage of the project. As mentioned, the risks are important early in the project, so we'll need to list them as part of this document. And then the project team, the stakeholders, we discussed that already, but we will go into more detail on project structure and stakeholders list and the likes. And if possible, we'd like to confirm early in the project who will be the approvers for this project. So most of the components listed here will be refined during the next phase, during the planning phase. So this is, I suppose, what I had mentioned early in this course, is that some components will be seen in the initiation and then reviewed in planning and then monitored or managed in execution. So that's something to bear in mind. Sometimes some of these components here can only be defined later on. Sometimes the initiation goes so fast that the risk, for instance, is only, and the budget can only be fine-tuned during planning. But we stick to the theoretical view, and hopefully we'll have all these components included. The first key point of discussion during the initiation phase is scope. We need to define what the project will deliver, obviously. So what is the product at the end? What are the deliverables? So in order to do that, we need to set boundaries around the project. We need to set a clear goal. So it's important at this stage to include all the key components that are in scope. And by key components is the big chunks. It's very important for us that we don't forget any quote-unquote big chunks. If we do, then later on in the project, that would obviously impact the timeframes and the budget. So it's a bit, it's now or never, I'd say. And it's also important to stipulate what we will leave out of scope, what we will not include in a project. What we don't want is someone from the business assuming the project will include one component, and after halfway through the project they realize the component is not included, and therefore the project could be facing some difficulties. So by clearly listing the big chunk that is out of scope, then this business person would know, and then at this stage of the project they still have a chance to, well, I'd like to have this also part of the project. Where is it out of scope? And then we can review the budget and the like. So I just wanted to mention as well that this process will be refined during planning. We will have a more granular approach. The scope, the way I see it, is what is setting the boundaries. The scope is the boundaries, and the requirement is what's inside. The scope is high level, and the requirements is more detailed level. So when we go into planning, we will discover a couple of tools that can be used to go into more precise definition of the requirement, but at this stage a broad brush. So I'm just going to show you an example here that I think will show you the level of detail that is sufficient in a scope. Let's take the example of a website that needs to be stood up. The managing director wants to start selling his product on the website. He doesn't have a website, but he does have the resources to write the content, and it needs a project for someone outside his team to set up the infrastructure around the website. So the project statement could look something like this. The project will include, and that means that the project will have in scope, is the sourcing and registration of the hostname, the infrastructure for hosting the website, design, build, rollout, security testing, and setting up the ongoing maintenance with third party. So we can add more words to this. We can, I suppose, at this stage say as much as we can, but usually we don't have that luxury, and we just, yeah, this is what we want, and this is on the high level what we would like the project to deliver. Out of scope, is to avoid any misunderstanding with the project team. When the business will engage a project team, is this will be out of scope. We don't want you to write the content of the website. We will take care of the policy approval, And the ongoing maintenance of the website, we really don't want you to do it. We just want you to organize the maintenance for it. So it doesn't have to be complicated. Just few bullet points like that are usually enough. If you have someone from business or whoever say, oh, that's a bit vague, and then you can drill down a little bit. But as I was saying, usually it has to be done very quickly. Don't pay attention to this. It's just to highlight that we can sometimes make things very simple, very complicated. I've never had the business or program manager or anyone telling me, oh, your scope statement doesn't hold water. So as long as everyone agrees, this is really what is critical at this stage. That doesn't prevent the fact from the scope here is very important, but the process doesn't have to be complex. The scope can be changed later on, so this is what we call the scope control or the change control. That will be elaborated more in the next phase. So during initiation, we want to make sure that the key thing to remember is we want to make sure that we do not quote-unquote forget any large chunk of the project. And we want to also obviously clearly stipulate what we do not want the project to deliver, which is the out of scope component. But that's pretty much it for the scope during initiation. Let's discuss cost as part of the initiation phase. So let's assume we have someone from the business who has a project idea. Sometimes they've done all the hard work for us and they've done their own investigation. They already have a cost and they just hand us the paperwork. But at other times, they are requesting the project team to prepare the cost for them. So obviously, this is assuming that there's a project team that can assist. Regardless of who's doing the cost, it's usually done on a very high level. So before we get started, I just wanted to highlight a couple of ways that the cost can be calculated. The first type of cost estimate is the rough order of magnitude, the ROM estimate. You would hear that. So that can be done by a combination of expert judgment, top-down estimating, and analogous estimating. So the ROM estimate is perfect for an initiation. It's something that is very high level, but still gives them an idea if they can afford it or not. Expert judgment can be used sometimes is you have one of those gurus, for instance, to set up a website, as we said before. Someone will say, oh yeah, you want to set up a website, have all the infrastructure done, that's going to cost you around 200 grand or the likes. So that's something that is sometimes used. We want to kick off the project quickly. We free up the $200,000 and then we get started. Another method that is used is called the top-down estimating, and it's the high-level estimate as well. But it's calculated by adding all the high-level components of a project together. For instance, for the website, you would have the cost of the materials, the cost of the contractors and the likes, and you would add all that up, and that would give you a high-level idea. So it's very similar to the next one, which is the analogous estimate. It's an estimating that is being done by using a previous example of something that has been done that is very similar. So this is, as I was saying, this is perfect for initiation because it's high level. At this stage, yes, the business is sometimes expecting a plus minus and 3-point estimating that we'll be seeing in the next slide. The second type of estimate is called the detailed estimate. There's only one way to have a detailed estimate. It's just to do a bottom up. But when we go into planning, we'll see how this is actually used. We can sometimes also call this definitive, which is a bit scary in initiation to have a definitive budget. When we know all the smaller components and we add them all up, we are usually pretty close to the final estimate. So this is more suited for the planning phase, yes. So I mentioned when we discussed ROM, the 3-point estimation. I just found that a bit tricky because if you go to the business and you tell them this will cost you $200,000 plus or minus, the plus being the worst case, the minus being the best case, then it doesn't usually fly when you say, well, you could pay that will cost you 200,000, but it could go up to 300,000. They're usually a bit scared. So, but they like the best case, but they don't really like the worst case. But it's sometimes with ROM is to be expected. We are on the high level stuff, so please bear in mind that this is only a rough estimate, and you could have some additional cost to it. But we could have also a dream run, and that would be a best case. You would say it's 200,000 plus or minus 30, 40%, depending on where you work in a company. When the project is outsourced, it's an interesting scenario. Let's say in the previous example, the website setup. You are a company and you want to have this job done. You could do it internally if you have the expertise. Sometimes you have an IT shop and they can do the IT component and they can do the work, but sometimes you have to outsource it. And when you outsource, in a way, it's easier because when you outsource, they usually more or less know, they usually give you a price and they more or less know what needs to be done because they're usually the experts and they do that day in, day out. They have, bid teams who provide quotes all over the place. In this instance, it'll be in a way easier, more expensive obviously if it's also, but it will be easier to you get a precise cost on this and you could hold them to it. So I want to give an example also just to show you that once again, initiation phase doesn't have to be too granular. Following on the previous example, I'm just reminding the example here quickly, the example of a website that is being set up. So the CIO of the company has estimated the cost of this website and it will be around 520K. So infrastructure 200K, design, build and test 200K, security testing 100K, ongoing maintenance 20K. You add all that up, you have 520K. So the CIO, you have an expert judgment. Even if the project is outsourced, the CIO of the company needing the project, they will come to you and they will say, yep, you want to have that done. These guys can, this company can do it for you, and it's usually around 520K to be precise, because of this maintenance that comes at a 20K extra. So this is the example that you would have when you rely on the expert judgment to do the estimate. So that's pretty much it for the cost. Once again, when we go to planning, we will be a bit more granular on how we can come up with a cost, but initiation, it's all happening very quickly. They want to know on a high level how much it will cost. They want to get approvals. They can add a little bit on top if they use the the 3-point estimating, so as to make sure that they can cover a little bit of contingency there. But that's all that is required. And in your project charter, you would add statement, project cost, and you would just list this, and that would be perfect. Once again, like for the scope, if you know more, if you can be more granular, yes, by all means, go for it. But usually you don't have that luxury. Welcome to the stakeholder management part of initiation. This is a favorite of mine, the assessment of the stakeholders' influence and interest in a project is important. We will be discussing this, and just want to outline right from the start that not doing this properly and actively can severely impact the project. So there's a lot of stress around project management, around timeframes and budget, and how important they are, and meeting your timeframes and not going over budget is critical. But I would argue that if you deliver something the stakeholders don't want or they're not happy with, it's as bad. So we need to understand the stakeholders. We need to understand every one of them, what they want, and how interested they are in a project. We have one way to do this stakeholder assessment matrix that is very common around project management, but when we move into part 2, I will provide you another tool that I created that I've been using on my projects and has been serving me well. First, let's have a look at the definition of a stakeholder. So a stakeholder is anyone involved in a project or being impacted by it. So who are you working with? So that could be, that's the obvious ones, that your team, your peers, even influence the project, your management, there you are working with. Who will receive the benefits of the project? That's more around the business, external customers, the users. They'll be receiving some of the benefits. Who can interrupt the project? I think this is something that is often forgotten. Yes, the business wants this. Yes, the project team is super motivated. But if someone can come left field and out of the sudden interrupt the project, that is something that needs to be done. I mean, in government, for instance, you could be running on a project very happily, everybody's happy, but there's a budget cut, and that's something that you need to keep an eye on. So they will be part of your project. There will be a stakeholder that we need to maintain the relationship with if we can, or at least be aware of their presence. Who provides the money? That obviously a stakeholder as well. Who will operate the end product? The users or the contractors, suppliers. In other words, a way to define the stakeholder, the way it's been given to me by in one of my courses, who is waiting for you at the end of the project with a stake. So we need to put a stakeholder list together. One way to go about it is to start on a stakeholder matrix, where we put all the stakeholders and we categorize them based on their interest and their influence on the project. First of all, we have some stakeholders that don't have much influence and they don't have much interest. So we will monitor all those. So they more or less, they cannot really impact the project, and they don't have a strong interest in the project either. Now if we move to the right, sorry, we have the stakeholders that have low influence, but they have high interest in it. Top left, we'll have some stakeholders that have very high influence and they have a low interest. Yeah, we need to keep them satisfied. But I'll come back to this one because this is my favorite. And then you have the high influence, high interest, and you need to manage those closely. Those are the guys that can have a lot of influence on the project and are very interested in it. This is the guys that more or less you need to keep happy. Another way to manage closely, I would say keep happy. But my favorite group to keep track on, because they are the one lurking, is this group here, the high influence, low interest. It's more or less the stakeholders who sometimes they were against the project, so that's why they have low interest. They could interrupt the project potentially because they do have high influence. So this is the group that I would personally be very aware of. I mean, the one that have high interest, you could argue that as they have a high interest, don't worry about getting in touch with them, because they will get in touch with you because they are interested. So this is why for me I think the top left is as, if not more important than this one. So busy slide, but there's nothing like an example. So let's say we have a project, a software development project, and then we have managed to list all our stakeholders here. So if we look on the left hand side, there's a project manager, test manager, development manager, we have the business analyst, we have the infrastructure team lead, finance manager, senior user, and etc. So for instance, a project manager, he has high interest, and I'm sorry to say he has a medium influence. He doesn't have that high an influence on the project. Obviously, he can make he can influence the outcome of the project by speeding things up when he can. But at the end of the day, he cannot just say let's stop this project. That's not his role either. Test manager is a bit in the same boat. Someone is just testing. Of course, they have high interest because they are the one that will be testing the thing, but an influence is medium. Once again, they can really stop it. So we'll have a look at the communication column at the end of this. Development manager, he's got also high interest, I would say medium influence, business analyst, high, even lower influence. That's just an example. I mean, obviously you would have situation where the high interest and influence, excuse me, is different. The infrastructure team lead, same. And then we go to the finance manager. So the finance manager would have a low interest sometimes and a high influence. So this is the scenario I was saying before, and that's why I say it's really for me a key one. It wouldn't show much of interest, but at the end of the day, he could say, sorry, we had to pull your budget and give it to another project if he's not really. So this is why it's very important to have a strategy to deal with this finance manager. A senior user, same thing, low interest, maybe something he didn't want to go with. It doesn't have the new product, it doesn't have the new software, but it's got a very high influence. At the end of the day, if we do all this work and he says, no, sorry, not happy with this, and then that's something that we have the length of the project to try and influence him or her. And then you go down the list, operation manager, business representative. The last one I want to mention is a senior executive. So he's in a category, obviously, high interest, high influence. So those are also the one that you need to manage closely. But at least, as I was saying, you would see them. They wouldn't be lurking in the dark, as opposed to maybe the finance manager or the senior user. So don't take this as a truth for all projects. It's just one example of how things could be. You could be on a project where, for instance, the finance manager has a very high interest in it, because it's gonna improve his bottom line at the end of the financial year. So, but it's just an example. Something that was said in a previous slide is regarding this matrix, that it can be used as a basis for a communication plan. As part of the project, sometimes you have a communication plan, and what I think is the best way to do it is to use this stakeholder matrix here, and the stakeholder management plan, if you want, you can call it this way, to more or less put your communication plan together. So you kill two birds with one stone. Here you have your matrix. By the way, this is not something that can always be published for obvious reasons, but you can tailor your communication based on the interest and influence factors. So if you take an example, the finance manager here, so I've already highlighted is high influence, but he has low interest. So I need to find some type of strategy to more or less raise his interest and to make sure he doesn't come at the last minute to take some money off the project. So what I have here, for instance, attempt to communicate regularly, keep closely in the loop on any budget related matters. The senior user, you would have the part of the steering committee, try and bring in a steering committee or her, and the attempt to communicate regularly outside the steering committee. So we'll discuss the steering committee later on, but that's just to show the communication column is used, how we will be communicating with those stakeholders. And I just wanted to highlight the low and high, but we can very quickly go through the communication strategies we would have with the others. Test manager, we will bring her to the project team meetings. We will send emails. That's the way we will communicate with her. Development manager, we will be part of the project team. We will send emails. The infrastructure team lead, we will bring in to weekly project meetings to get his buy-in, because sometimes they're working on so many projects, it's hard to get them interested. The operation manager, in our communication, we would keep him in the loop by sending weekly reports. We'll increase engagement when close to implementation date, because the interest will grow as we get closer to the delivery date. The business representative, we will make her part of the weekly meetings, and we will communicate with emails. The senior executive obviously will be part of the steering committee. We will review the steering committee later on, and then obviously you can put some notes. And for instance, the senior user here, the note is the reason why he's been put in a category as low interest is he has not shown great interest in the project. Has been focused on other more important projects, so that could be a reason. So he's been working on a very critical other project, and we roped him into this project, and he's not fully with us. He's not fully interested. So that's a bit dangerous, because we could be, as is the user, be the person using the product, and if he comes in too late, then that could cause challenges to the project. So that's it for stakeholder management. We have seen how to identify stakeholders of the project, how we can put them into a neat little list, and also in that list we can just more or less draft our communication plan. As I was mentioned earlier, I mean, we don't always want to publish this the way it is. We can probably remove the interest and influence. Maybe some stakeholder might not want to be seen in a category with low influence or the like, so it's something we have to be sensitive. It's more something we keep in our files. But the communication plan, obviously we can tidy it up. We can remove the keep in the loop by sending weekly reports and comments like this, but we can say, well, this we will communicate via the steering committee, via email, via project meetings, which is more, I suppose, politically correct. So that's it for stakeholder management. Next, we will look at the exciting risk management part of a project. Welcome back to the course. So we touched on the importance of identifying risks early in a project. When an executive comes up with a project idea, sometimes they are so keen that they haven't really checked all the risks, and they usually don't really want to highlight all the risks that come with their project. So I think it's a bit of an opportunity for everyone to have a bit of reality check and see if the project is really viable or not, and if there are some big risks, then we can bring them to the executive's attention, and they can make a more informed decision. So they can either decide if the risk is just too big, they just stop now, or at least before we spend any money on the project, everybody know what they are getting themselves into. So during the initiation phase, we list just the few key risks. We don't want to get bogged down into hundreds of risks. The key risks, and then we assess if they are acceptable. So we use a tool to do this, and this tool will be used along the project. It's called the risk register, and it's always good to have a template handy, so I've put one into the resources. So finding risk during the initiation phase is important also, in a way, because it can help us get some extra funds, extra money. Let's say you have a risk mitigation that we could implement, but that requires a bit of money, so we could go to the steering committee and say can we get some money just in case this risk occurs. So as you progress in a project, it's more and more difficult to get money, obviously. So now is a very good moment to do it. During these slides, we'll see a lot of risk types, a lot of ways to address them and the like. So it's all very academic, but you don't need to remember all this. It's just for your informations, just to show you the variety of risks and the variety of approaches. To get us started with identifying risks, it's always a good idea to have a look at the types of risks. So I've listed here a few types of risks that you could work through with the business to try and assess the amount of risks. So the cost risks, that's an obvious one. What could go in the way of the project that will increase the cost of the project? The schedule risk as well. If there is slippage in the schedule, is that a big risk for the project? Reputation risks, if not done well, is it a reputation risk that could occur there? Strategic risk, is the project in line with the company strategy, or is there a big strategy change coming up? and would that be, impacting the project if it does occur? And there's all the legal risks, so legal regulatory risks, contract risk if we involve with third parties. And finally, there's a risk associated with external hazard. So that could be storms, floods, earthquakes, vandalism, labor strikes, and this is where you can go completely crazy and come up with a huge amount of risk. So common sense needs to prevail. So the difficulty obviously with risk is where do you draw the line, especially if you look at external hazards and mention where do you draw the line. So it's just a matter of making sure that the risks that we have are really quote unquote realistic, and we are not just scaring the business too much with the risks. Moving on to the next slide, we have a list of risks. We need to decide now what we do with each risk. So there's several ways to deal with them, several outcomes that the risk can have, and I'll be walking you through those. The first thing we can do with a risk is accept it. So be it. We know we have this risk. If it happens, then so be it. So we take the risk, more or less. The second thing we can do with a risk is avoid it. So cancelling the project is a bit of an extreme, but there are other things we might be able to do to avoid the risk. We could change the plan. We could change the way the final product will look like, so this risk is avoided. So that's another way to deal with risk. Another thing we can do with a risk is transfer it to someone else, another entity, another stakeholder, or the like. So for instance, insurance, we could take an insurance, and if this risk occurs, then the insurance will take over, will transfer it to the insurance. We could mitigate the risk, and this is the most common action, is we take some action now to reduce the likelihood or the impact of the risk. So we mitigate the risk. And finally, we can exploit the risk. So this only works with positive risks. So what is a positive risk? It's a risk that if it occurs, it means something good for the project. So it could be, for instance, we could have a breakthrough somewhere. It could be a cost of something to purchase could drop along the way. So if this risk occurs, then we have an action in place that we will take once the risk takes place. Last step before we go into our risk register is a type of matrix that we can use to assess the risk severity. So there's three components in a way. There's the likelihood of a risk, there's the impact of a risk, and that will drive the severity, which is this colorful part in there. So it's not always done, but it's good practice, and I think it will make you look good if you're a project manager and you use this tool. What's interesting is different companies, organizations, software providers, and the likes, they would have their own matrix sometimes with different values there. So I've just taken a typical one, I suppose, that what I believe is very commonly used. So we have the list of our risks, and so what we need to do now is to check the likelihood and also the impact of the risk. So the likelihood can be one of those, almost certain, likely, possible, unlikely, and rare. The impact, insignificant, all the way up to severe. So to assess the likelihood and the impact, it's a bit tricky sometimes, because it's something that is a bit it's not very concrete, if you like. So it's a matter of working with the business, the project team, to agree on the likelihood of each risk and then the impact. And then we have a neat little outcome, which would be the severity. Even if a risk impact is severe, but the likelihood is rare, then is that the business might want to put it aside and say and accept it. The other way around, if you have something that is almost certain, but still and still impact insignificant and minor, then the business might decide, or you as a project manager might decide a different type of action. So likelihood and impact, very important, and that was the last part before we move on to the risk register that I mentioned. So as part of the risk management process in initiation, we create what we call a risk register, which is a document, Excel, Word, or the likes, where we will list all the risks and the impact, likelihood, and severity, and the action that we take. So this is a register that has already pre-filled with a few examples. So I'll give you an example of each one of the outcomes that we discussed. So if we start with the first one, we put a risk number, we put a date raised, we put a risk description here, a word on this red part, if and then. It's good practice, and it will make you look good if you use this. I think it's a very good way to describe a risk using if then. Otherwise it can become very fluffy. You can say, oh, what if this happens, and the impact is not clear. So that really forces you to log your risk in a very structured way, and it makes the impact very clear as well. So if the flight is cancelled, then the budget will be impacted. So what is the impact? We have put the impact here as major. We have decided the likelihood is possible. We go back into our major and possible. Major here, possible here, gives us a severity of high. So the severity is high. We need to allocate an owner for each risk. If it's, if it stays open, so who will be, actively managing the risk, and if the risk occurs, who will address it. So it's very important that if you are the project manager, to avoid to have your name here, unless it's really a project management risk. But it's not always a project management risk. Sometimes you have to, like for the issue log that we will see later on, you need to make sure that someone actually owns the risk, monitors it for you, keeps an eye on it for you, and is ready to action if the risk takes place. So that will be reviewed also as part of the risk roles and responsibilities. It's very important to have a stakeholder responsible for each of the project component. The action, so we have decided that we will be transferring this risk. And we took travel insurance, for instance. That could be an option to transfer it. You pay a premium up front. This way you avoid the risk. The risk is still open, obviously. It could still occur. But if it does occur, then you know what to do. You have an outcome, you have an action, you have someone to do it. So this is the first example, transferring the risk. If we go to the next line, if there are train strikes in Paris, for instance, very unlikely, I know, but then we will not be able to travel to Madrid. The plan, you go on holidays, your plan is to take the train from Paris to Madrid. So the impact, you rate it as major. It's unlikely. But if you look in your matrix and you notice the severity is still marked as high. So the owner will be John, and here you've decided to avoid the risk. Yeah, now I don't want that risk to occur. I don't even want to be worried about it, so I want to avoid it. So forget about the train. I will rent a car instead. And then you can close that risk. This is not a risk anymore. So you don't want to drag this risk along with the project with you, because it's closed. Someone raised it, you've avoided it, so closed, gone. There is the next risk, the risk number 3, say it's if it's raining heavily during the week, then the camping trip will not be comfortable. Bit of an understatement, but it's just to give you a very simple holiday example. So the impact, you see it as moderate, it's not the end of the world, and the likelihood is unlikely, and that gives you a severity only of medium. So it's not high, it's a severity of medium. So the poor John is still responsible for this, responsible for everything, but you decide to accept this risk, and you close that risk. You say, yeah, it might rain, yes, I'm aware of it, thanks for raising it, but I accept it. Things happen, and if it rains, then it will rain. So we'll see then what we can do. Or you wouldn't have these two risks like this in a risk register, because you would take one of the two actions. But just for this this example, that's why I've in 3A 3B, if you have the same risk here, same impact, likelihood, severity, same owner, you would decide instead to mitigate it. So you would plan some indoor activities just in case. So you would I don't know, bring some board games. You would just prepare yourself before your holiday project start. You would prepare some activities to play indoors. So if this risk comes, then you know what to do. And this risk stays open because you don't accept it. You mitigate it. It's the difference with this one. Final example of a risk. If there are buses going to the beach, then we will not need to hire a car, and then we can save some money. That's an example of a positive risk. So the impact is moderate, the likelihood is possible, so the severity, quote unquote, severity being positive severity is high. John is still the owner. Action.com, you exploit this risk. Yes, we're aware this risk will happen, and if it happens, yeah, we can use the money saved to buy movie tickets, for instance. I think it shows well what is a positive risk and how it can be exploited. I think the fact of having a positive risk is not very that easy to understand. So I think with this example, hopefully that makes it slightly clearer. So to finish on risk, I wanted to give a couple of tips. So the first one is to include this key risk on your weekly reports and also on the meeting minutes. So that has a few advantages. That allows you to, as a project manager, to keep track of the risks. That also allow your team members to be aware of the risks. That allow your management also to be aware of the risks. That also allows everyone to check the status of a risk, so it doesn't get lost into a risk register somewhere that nobody really accesses. And sometimes risks close, sometimes there are new one coming up, and one of your team member could say, oh well, looking at your list, I realize that we could add this one as well. So it's a good practice, so you have frequent reminders of your risks. The second tip is to have risk review meetings. What I would do is, as early as you can in a project, and definitely if you can in initiation, it's ideal, have a brainstorming session on risk. So what a risk review meeting would look like is you would review all the existing risks. Obviously, if it's the first one, you might not have any risks, so it's an opportunity to create the risks and check the severity of the first one, and subsequent one you would check if the severity has changed. So you would have one initial meeting, and after every monthly or quarterly, depending on the length of the project, you could review your meetings. So you brainstorm any potential additional risk, you remove any risk that cannot occur anymore, and you ensure a broad range of stakeholders attend. And this is a key one, because what you don't want is at the middle of your project to have someone say, well, have you thought about that risk? So if you involved everyone, as broad a range of stakeholders as possible, so they're all there, they have the chance, they have the opportunity to raise risks, and then it's more difficult for them to to say, well, what about that risk? What have you done about this? So everybody gets a chance to raise every risk early in the project, and then to have at regular interval to update their risks. So that's pretty much it for the risk management. I hope it's all clear. As mentioned, there's a template there that you can access and review, and as always you have the slides if you want to go through those quickly. But next we will discuss project structure. Welcome back to the course. We will now review project structures. So towards the end of initiation, when there is a good chance that the project will go ahead, a project team is usually put together. So this project team will be based on obviously resource availability, knowledge, skills, and the likes. So in this section we will review different types of project structure. Could be internally managed, could be outsourced, and we will also have a look on how this project team relates to other parts of the business. So let's get started with the first very basic structure that we could have. So you are a project manager sitting here, you have a team working for you, you can have peers, which is other project managers working alongside. You could also have several teams, you could work on several projects if you have capacity, so you would have one team, or you would have also potentially another team. You would report to either a program manager, more likely if it's a company who has a lot of projects, they would have program managers overseeing several projects. Or you could, if it's a smaller shop or if it's just a very specific project, you could report to the business directly, an executive, or someone else. I mean, there's a lot of varieties. The most common being that you're reporting to a program manager or someone from the business, or sometimes just a line manager. So under you as a project manager, you would have team leads, team members, and the likes. Some of them will be fully dedicated to your project, so meaning that they are 100% of the time will be working on the project. Or if we take this example here, this team member seems to be 100% allocated to the project. But if we take the example of Peter there, he is working on 2 projects at the same time. So he's not a fully dedicated resource, is partially allocated to your project. And you would have Mary here, another team member. So she is working on your project, but she's also working on BAU. So BAU, it's the other part of the organization and that is not working on projects. She has to do daily tasks as well. So it's always a bit of a red flag when resources are shared. So you need to be quite strict on how you manage their time and making sure that they put a decent amount of work on your project. So this is it for the basic project structure. Next, we'll have the introduction of here a project office. We will, on the next slide, we will refine the role and responsibilities of the project office. What do they do? But in this org chart here is just to highlight that the project manager reports to a program manager or an executive, but at the same time he would be reporting back to a project office. And sometimes a project coordinator could be working with a project manager. So a project coordinator would perform all the administrative tasks. He would or she would organize meetings, sometimes write minutes, write agendas, would help with the coordination of activities, could help with the schedule. So depending on the level of skills of the project coordinator, he or she could be used to do various things for the project manager. So typically they would be involved when there are large projects and the project manager is a bit struggling to stay on top of all the admin things on top of the the project influencing quote unquote tasks. So in this case a project coordinator might be allocated to the project manager. So under this scenario, the project manager and the project coordinator will be part of a project office. A project office is a pool of project managers and coordinators mainly, usually. So the role of the project office is to set standards and policies for all projects. So when you join a company as a project manager, if you have a project office, they will more or less dictate what are the templates that you need to use, what is the process that you need to follow, the policies that are in place. So in other words, they set all the rules for you. And of course, they ensure that your processes are being followed. Usually, you would have to send, a report at a certain point in time every week. So they are here to remind you of that. In some instances, that's the last bullet point. I want to jump into this last bullet point is they have to provide all the reports. They collect all the reports and they have to send them to the business. So they would have a vested interest in you sending your report on time. They also can manage and allocate project manager and project resources and project coordinator mainly. So they would do the allocation of project managers across various projects. They would assist if you're a bit overused, or if you have some capacity, they might give you another task to do. And also they provide training if you're lucky, so you can get upskilled and get some training from the project office. So that's just a pretty quick overview on the project office. Project office usually it's for large companies when they have a lot of projects running, as mentioned. Service provider usually don't have project offices. So let's have a look at another project structure. In a scenario where the project is being outsourced to a contractor, to a third party, on the yellowish here we would have the usual internal structure with program manager, business area, and a project managers there. And then in greenish we would have the contractor. They would have their own structure usually. For large project they would have a project manager, and the company would have an in-house project manager as well. So the flow of information, if you like, would be from the team here to the project manager contracting, and up to the project manager in-house, and after the reporting flow will go up to the program manager. So that's just one scenario. If you like, sometimes the project manager he could report directly to the program manager or the business area. Sometimes when it's very small they don't need project managers, so therefore the team lead could report directly to the in-house project manager. But for large projects, two project managers, one on each side. Welcome back. So to finish on project structure, when we discuss communication, we mentioned the steering committee as a group that needs to be kept in a loop, and we need to have a structured way to communicate to this group. So the steering committee is a temporary structure that is being set up for the project, so they can oversee the project and provide some key decision and as I was going to say advice, but it's more than advice. They're really supposed to really steer the project. So this structure, more or less, is made of high-level stakeholders, but sometimes they bring experts to this meeting to enable them to make a decision. They're usually the sign-offs for the key decisions. So they are a very important group. So let's have a look of what typically the steering committee is made of. So they have what we call a senior user, which is the senior user is the end user of the product, if you like. They are the one that will be using what the project delivers. There's also a senior supplier, which is not always present, but when the project is at source, so when there is someone supplying the goods or a service, then they would attend here. And then the senior executive, also called the business owner. So this is the person really responsible for the project. The project is for him or her. So in a category of stakeholder, there will be high interest and high influence. So as the project is made for them, then they make the call, more or less. If at some stage they decide the project's not worthwhile anymore, they just make the call. So very important. So what's interesting with the steering committee is you would assume that the project manager is a mandatory attendee, but sometimes the project manager doesn't attend. So sometimes it's the project manager's manager attending, so they raise the bar a little bit. They want to get a bit of an independent view on the project. So it's not always your decision, but it's best if the project manager attends. So that's all I wanted to mention really on a steering committee, a group of high influence people meeting to discuss the project, and when there are some key issues, they would make the call. They can also be used as the escalation point. This is why I said it's good as a project manager that you attend, because you can raise your key issues. And that's it for project structure. So next we will wrap up the initiation phase, and we will start by checking some examples before wrapping up the phase. So earlier in initiation, I mentioned the project charter document, which is a document the project manager creates to regroup all the findings of the initiation phase. And this is being used as a way to get the business to sign off on the project, and we can go ahead with the project. I just wanted to give you an example to wrap the initiation phase up, because I think it always helps. I think, as I've mentioned, the project charter can be a bit scary sometimes. You see these huge templates with all this information that needs to be in, but it doesn't have to be. If we start with something very simple and we just add a few words around it, it can be actually quite a short exercise, especially taking into consideration that most of the content of this document is taken from other stakeholders, from the stakeholders. You're actually not writing much of the content. Let's take another project for a chance, building a bridge. So one of the section I was suggesting we have in the project charter document is the project objectives. So very simply, the project concerns the building of a bridge on the south side of the city. Something very simple like this for the project objectives. When they had some business case paperwork and the likes, you would take things from this document and you would put them in there. Same for the next section here, benefits and business case. That's something that you would often take from the business. I have here the current traffic on the center of the city has become unsustainable and is causing delays, and therefore we need this bridge. You would then go into the high level scope, what is in a scope and what is out of scope. So I have really simplified it. I think earlier in the scope I had several bullet points here, just really simplified it. Obviously you would have more words than this, but it's just to highlight the structure of the document. So in scope, the building and the testing of the bridge. This is what we want the project to do. We want the project to build a bridge and to make sure that it worked. You would have more subcomponents. I would think that's a bit vague. You would say where it needs to be done and the likes, but this is more or less to give you an idea of in and out of scope. So out of scope, you would have communication to road users and all the road signalization, for instance. You don't want the project team to take care of this. You will take care of this yourself. This is out of scope. The high level schedule would be just key milestones. You would just say by Jan, I would like to finish the planning phase. 2021 March, the company will be engaged. June, this has to happen, and you would want the completion by 2023 implementation. Budget the same. We had a quick look on budget. We talked about the rough order of magnitude, and one of the way to get to this rough order of magnitude was expert opinion. And then we asked an expert. Building a bridge, you just don't want to improvise too much. So you really need someone. You hired someone, an expert. He knows how it's done. He's a specialist. He's done that many times. So, and he came up with 120 million to build the bridge. And the budget as the council, sorry, has a budget of 150 million. So it looks like it could work. Next part, the key risks. Bad weather will delay construction. So you would worry that if there is bad weather, then the construction will be delayed, and then you would put that in your risk register, and you would then decide, what do we do with this? We would just accept it. You want to avoid it, that'll be more difficult. You probably could mitigate it, maybe, you know, do some indoor work while it's raining. I don't know, but that's a starting point. You would refer usually to your risk register. You could attach your risk register to the project charter to really help everyone make a sound decision. Another risk that I have listed here, obviously I'm not a bridge building specialist, but I like this example. So road authorities dependency, it could delay implementation date. So that I would imagine you would have a few loops to go through to build a bridge, and one of those being, you know, the policies, the standards, and the likes. So that's something that would cause delay. So as part of the risk mitigation, you would try and speed up that process, or really at least very understand what are the steps involved. You would give also the project structure, an overview of the project team. So you've decided to go to outsource the project. Obviously, you didn't have handy a specialist team to build bridge. So you would have a team made of the following. You would have an internal project manager. You would put Mary Smith, part of the council. She would be your internal project manager. And you would have project managers from two different companies. So you would have a company XYZ for doing, I don't know, the construction itself, and ABC to do something else. So you would have a team made of 3 project managers, because this project would be so big that the third party would have project managers. You would set up a steering committee and part of the stakeholder list, I suppose. A steering committee will be made of the senior user, which is the road authority representative. So the senior user, he will be representing everyone using the bridge. So obviously you cannot have all the users, but he would be the one representing all the users. The senior supplier would be the company XYZ. They are the key guys. They are the key guys building the bridge, so they would be the senior supplier. You would also have the senior executive, and that's a top boss. I would assume it's the mayor of the city. So he or she will be the one making the key decisions on the project. And then you would have a stakeholder list. I have here just duplicated the steering committee. You would obviously have the project manager, you would have Mary in this, you would have the project managers of these 2 companies, and you would have anyone you can think of. List of approvers required. Yes, that's important. You would have the senior executive would be signing off the document after review from the management team. So you know that the key approver for this project will be the mayor of the city. So that's a bit of a wrap up of the project charter. I hope it makes sense. We're not done with example. We still have a couple of examples after this one, but I think that hopefully is just sealing all the information that you've had in this phase, for the phase initiation phase. And you have also a template in your resources. Once again, the template, every company would have a different type of template. So if you join as a project manager somewhere, they would give you a template. But I just wanted to put a template in the resource just to show you that it doesn't have to be too complicated. Let's have a look at another example, but this time more on some specific components of the project charter. So I've just focusing here on a few components of the project charter, which are the cost, the schedule, the business case, and the team. So first example, you would have a software delivery. So the high level cost, you would have the service provider XYZ has provided an estimate of 150K and 50K ongoing. So it is outsourced environment, and this is usually the best way to get an estimate, because you know that the service providers are doing this day in and out. As I was mentioning, they have big teams, so they will be able to give you a very precise cost. High level schedule, so the provider has estimated 3 months to deliver. So then based on that and based on when the project can start, you should be able to give the business an implementation date. up to you if you want to add some contingency or not. So the business case, we need an accounting system to avoid manual input and human errors costing us 75,000 per year. So they are telling you that the one-off cost will be 150K and 50K ongoing, but you are telling them that I would save us 75K per year. So is that worth it? So they would say, well, 50K cost for 75K saving. Yes, it's 25K per year, but is that really worth the hassle, taking into account that you need to recoup your initial cost? So you put all that up to them, and they can make an informed decision. The team, putting a team together, the service provider provide us with a project manager. A steering committee will be set up with this project manager and a senior resource from XYZ, which is the service provider here. Next project, as an example, you develop a website. So the high level cost, you have an SME, a subject matter expert, or other word for a guru, estimated at $30,000. You have a high level schedule, say that we need this before Christmas. That's more the business imperative. So you would get the estimate from the SME and you see if that could work. The business case is we want an online facility to reduce the amount of phone calls, and there's some numbers there. So once again, you would put all these numbers together for the business to decide cost vs savings. Is it worth it? And a team, internal team can do the work, so it won't be an outsourced project like the previous one. It'll be an entirely managed project. We'll use Mary as our project manager, and the rest of the team has already been set up, so you can rest easy that we can run this project, no problem. Another example that I've just actually given, an expert estimated 120 million, the high level schedule, the expert mentioned 3 years, the bridge is required to avoid congestion, and to put the team together, we know this PM specializes in bridge construction, so we will hire him as a contractor. Instead of having, that's another scenario. In the previous one, I had someone internally from the council, but you realize that to be more confident, maybe to have a specialist project manager, and you would hire him or her. Final example, just to keep with going on holidays, it's just I like to give a various range of examples. So high level cost, well, you have $5,000 to spend. The high level schedule, you have 2 weeks. Business case, we really need a break, and the team, the two of us and the kids. So as part of the bearing in mind we are in the initiation phase, so the project has not started yet. So in other words, if you stay with a going on holidays project, you have $5,000 to spend, and you have 2 weeks available, and then you can more or less decide, well, is the business case worthwhile? Does it hold water? Do I have can we start planning on this? And this is the advantage that of asking ourselves this question before we go into planning, because if you go into planning and if you start investigating and the likes, and after you realize, well, we don't even have the money for it, or we don't even have the leave for it. So I wanted to finish with this example just to highlight the importance of getting the key things right in the initiation phase, because after it's just too late. You don't want to go into all this planning only to realize that, well, that's not viable project, and that's the whole purpose of the initiation phase. Welcome back to wrap up our project initiation. So I started off this phase by stating that the project initiation doesn't always occur, or at the very least doesn't occur as formally. Just a bit of a reality check, as opposed to what you could be learning to some project management standards, methodology and the likes. You would have a scenario where someone at management and executive, they would just come to you and let you know, yes, you have a project, we already worked out the budget, and this needs to be implemented by such a date, and it's usually quite aggressive. So this happens. It's important for you when you get involved at this stage to be very active at trying to find any potential gaps, because anything that is missed out at this phase, it'll be very difficult to fix later on. You need to challenge very tactfully the resource that came up with this quote. You need to try and find out how did they come to that quote. You need to check if they have forgotten anything to include in that quote. Sometimes they come up with quote, but they don't think about all the overheads and the like. So as a project manager, you really need to make sure that everything is included, and to avoid that, as you do the planning, you realize, well, but they didn't include this, they didn't include that. So challenge tactfully, that would be my recommendation, if you are involved in this initiation, to make sure that there's a full cost provided early and possible, because once the budget is allocated, then it will get harder and if not impossible, as you progress in a project, to amend and change. So you see the initiation phase as an analogy. If you want to start a painting, the initiation phase is when you outlined the large shapes on your canvas. If you forget one, or if you don't do one right, then it doesn't have to be precise, broad brush, but if you forget a large chunk, then it'll be very difficult to rectify. So we have a quiz to wrap things up, and we'll be continuing with the next phase, which is project planning. Welcome back to the course. Phase 2, planning, section overview. So in this section, we review the purpose of the planning phase. We will also discuss the project manager role in this phase. We'll review an important document the project manager has to create during this phase. It's called the project management plan usually. And the key components of this phase that we will discuss will be the scope and requirements, scheduling, cost, budget, and quality planning. We will finish, as usual, with an example of the document created by the project manager, and then we will have a wrap-up and some quiz as well. Welcome to project planning. So the project is now approved. We finished the initiation, all sign off, and we're ready to go. So we need to plan how we will execute the project, execution being the next phase. So what is the purpose of planning? It's more or less, how will we be doing this project? How will we be performing the activities of this project? Let's have a look at the key components that are involved in planning. We go back to scope requirements, get more granular, a bit of a lower level. What exactly do we want to achieve? What is included? What is excluded? We set the boundaries a bit more in a more refined way. We have a closer look at a schedule. Now we are not into the broad brush anymore. We are detailed. So we are really looking at each step that is required, the dependencies, the duration of the steps, and that should give us a final delivery date. We have a look at the budget and cost into much more detail. We have another look at stakeholders, if they are still okay, and more closely also in the roles and responsibilities. This is the key document that we will be delivering at the end of this phase. We had the project charter in initiation, and in this phase we will call the document that is created by the project manager the project management plan. And then planning all other activities, more or less. Depending on the project, you will have more or less activities. Here I've listed a few. We're planning on how we will be reporting on the project. Do we need to keep anyone in the loop? On quality control, we talk about quality. Can we check what we are doing is right? The communication, we talked about that in a stakeholder. how we're going to communicate and with who and how. We'll have a look at planning for procurement. Do we need to buy anything? And if yes, how we'll be doing it? And we'll have also, of course, we'll have a look at the risks. So the overall outcome sought from planning is to know how each project activity will be conducted. So in other words, once planning is completed, everybody should know what they have to do and in which order. So we are detailed, we are meticulous, we put everything in our plan. Forget about the broad brush of initiation. Now it has to be very precise, because when we execute, we execute. Welcome back to the course. Let's have a look at the project manager role in planning. During initiation, the project manager created a project charter, and during planning, the project manager creates a project management plan that will encompass all the findings of the planning and will submit this for sign-off. He or she has another document to create, some paperwork to do. On top of that, the two key activities that the project manager needs to do, he needs to finalize the schedule and the budget. Those are key, and they are very important, and they need to be done with a lot of detail. On top of this, of course, the project manager needs to ensure that all the planning is done correctly. I just listed a few here. The PM needs to ensure that the planning of activities is thorough, that the requirements are clear, scope is defined, that the team structure is finalized, a full list of stakeholders is created, that the resources are available. That's very important, obviously, for the planning and the schedule. That everybody is on board. We could have a list of stakeholders, but they are not engaged. And if the resources are not available, then we won't go very far. So usually what we do is we have a kickoff meeting where we engage all the stakeholders, all the project resources, and say, if anyone has something to say it now, otherwise we are going. We need to ensure that the reporting is defined, as mentioned earlier, and all the steps are taken to deliver a good product, which is planning for quality, and that the communication is clear. On top of that, let's have a look at the risk register also while we are at it. So that's a lot of things to do during planning. It's a very active phase for the project manager. Once again, that's what your project management plan could look like. I have taken some of the components that were in the first slide on the project planning, but I've added a few here. The critical success factors, which would be how will we decide if the project is a success or not. That's something that we could include in the project management plan. We could list all the deliverables. If you remember from terminology, that's everything that the project will be handing over at the end of the project. The work breakdown structure, that's something that is a way to list requirements, or what is required from the project. And I have an example of this later on. You could also have a list of constraints that I haven't mentioned before. A project approach, which is how will we be doing this project. Sometimes it's not required because the way to do the project is quite standard, but if we do something a little bit different, I suppose it's always good to list it. So that's another document that we need to create. And next we will start to review the first component, which is going back to scope and requirements. Now we're going back to scope and requirements. So during initiation it was all high level, but now is the time to really nail the requirements. So under a typical project, you would have a business on one side and a project team on the other side. The business would create the requirements, some type of requirement document that needs to be signed off, and then the project team will take those requirements, ensure that they are clear, that they are complete, and then we'll do the execution based on this document. So it's critical because the requirements will be used along the project for the term of the project. So it's very critical also that they are signed off, approved, because otherwise it can open a lot of discussion later on. So we're not going to spend too much time on scope and requirements. We've already opened that a bit in the initiation. The key thing here is that it's more detailed. So how do we create a requirements document? So there's usually some type of business analyst involved on behalf of the business to put all the business want in one document. It could be called the business requirements document. It could be called the detail requirements document, but it can also be a requirement matrix at a high level. And the advantage of the requirement matrix, it's quite quick to go back to a requirement. You would have a requirement here and there's a number associated to it. I'm just giving you an example here. That's quite useful, as we'll see, but if it's not a requirement matrix, there will be some type of other document anyway where the requirements are clearly articulated. Just to stress the fact that this exercise is quite important for the project. We will use the requirement matrix or any type of requirement document during the execution to design and build the product. It will also be used to check the scope. So if the business say, have you thought about that halfway through the project? And if it's not in the list, we said, sorry, that was not in this list, so we need to do a change control. It will be used to check the quality. When we have a test team, they will go through all this requirement and they will confirm that the build has been done properly and then include all these requirements. And the final acceptance. When the product is completed, the business will go back with this list and will ensure that yes, they have this, yes, they have that, tick, 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 and it's all done. It's especially important in a vendor environment when a company is contracted to do a work. Just to before you sign off and free up the money, you would usually have some discussions around the requirement. So the requirement here, for instance, just they can have here some category. It could be a compliance requirement, could be a security requirement, it could be just a design requirement, and then you would have a some type of description. That could be a good starting point. Like for instance, a security requirement: all transactions on the website must be encrypted, and then you could have something more detailed underneath. Before we move on to the next part of planning, I just wanted to briefly mention a tool, as we are in requirements, that business analysts use sometimes to visualize the requirements that are required by the business on the project. So it's called a WBS, or the work breakdown structure, and it's just a fancy way to decompose deliverables into smaller chunks. So it can be used, it's used mostly by business analysts, but it can also be used by project manager. So for instance, here actually I have the example of a project that I have decomposed using the WBS chart. So the way it works is it goes from the more complex to the more detailed component, and it works with subcategories. So if you have, for instance, I have the higher component, which is my project is to go on holidays. I decompose this project into the key activities that I feel are required to deliver this project. And then under each key activity, I have a smaller activity under each. So if I just take one example under this side destination, so my project would be summer holidays, and my sub project, if you like, my sub component would be decide on destination, and under decide on destination, I would have brainstorm ideas, check the weather. Under the next subcomponent is, how am I going to decide on itinerary? I'll have a look at the timing, I'll have a look at the stops I want to have, and the sites that I want to visit. So in other words, it's when you go from top to bottom, you get more and more granular, and it's a good way not to forget anything. It's called WBS, Work Breakdown Structure. Just wanted to mention it just in case you hear about it and you can say, yep, I've heard of that, I know what it is. Welcome to schedule planning. So as it was the case for scope, we are doing schedule planning now in a more detailed way. So during this phase, we create a schedule with more detailed milestones, obviously, and dependencies than what we had in initiation. Initiation, we just had some key milestones listed there, and now we are required to produce a more detailed schedule so we can start tracking things as they progress. So during planning, we mostly plan for activities that will happen during the execution. Nobody is really interested in what will happen in closing, which is after the product has been delivered. So it's mostly the execution activities that we would be planning there. So it's important, obviously, not only to have a final date, but also to coordinate the resource, to know when a task finishes, so another task can start, and then free up the resource, and making sure that the other resource is obviously available. And it's also important, so we've seen for the resource, for the activities, for the implementation date, but it's also important for the final costing, because some cost is dependent on the length of the project. For instance, a project manager, hopefully you'll stay there for the life of the project. So if the project is 6 months, or if the project is 9 months, you will have a different project management cost. So that's a reason why it's important to have all the planning done as precisely as possible, because it does impact the budget as well. Welcome back to planning and the scheduling part of planning. After the introduction, I wanted to show you some typical components that fall under the execution part. So it's always a good idea when you plan for a project to check if you fall under this scenario here. So at the end of planning, you move into execution. So in other words, in planning, you need to plan for the execution as we mentioned earlier. So you have to look forward at what the execution will entail. So there are instances where the execution will be decomposed as follows. So you would have the design, build, test, and then the implementation. So that's typical for an IT project. You would have the requirements would occur before, and during the execution you will do the design, you will do the build, you will do the test, the implementation, and after the execution component will end. So during planning, you will do the requirements gathering. So the business will come with a requirement matrix or a business requirement document, and that will tell you what needs to be done in detail. And then during the execution, you will go into design and how we will do it. So sometimes there's some confusion. The design is not part of planning, although it will be tempting to put it there, but it's not. What is in planning is you gather the requirements, and then design is part of the execution. Design will tell you how you will do this. The requirements will tell you what you will do, and the design will tell you how you will do it. The requirements on a high level, the business here, I want a website that has this, that has that, and the likes, and the business analyst as part of the design will tell you how they will convert this requirement into something concrete, how the web page will exactly be designed. And after we move on to build, so the developers, build or construction, they will use the design document produced here, and they will use it to build the product. When the build is completed, hopefully you will have a test step here where you will check if the work is properly done and as per requirements. This is what we were saying before. The requirement document is used for design, for build, and for test. Final step after testing is you do the implementation. So as you can see, that can be very useful to put a draft schedule together. You would have a heading with design, a heading with build, test, implementation, and under each heading you would have the more detailed tasks. Welcome back. Let's have a look at some examples for this design, build, test, implementation lifecycle scenario. There's 5 projects. Let's check if they fit that model, and if they do, what would activities will take place under each one of those. So I also have the requirements here, which is obviously the starting point. First project would be a software delivery. The requirements from the business was what software we want and what we want the software to do. The design team, business analysts, would take that requirements and will draft some software specification, so that works. The build team will do the coding or the configuration. Test team will test it, and then the implementation will be a go live. So that's design, build, test, implementation. So that works. So that's a model that works for the software delivery. Developing a website, a little bit similar. So the business would say in a requirement what type of website they want and the functionality. The design team will do the website design. The build team will create that website. Test team will test, and will go live the same way, which is the implementation. Now, building a bridge, the requirements, as we've seen, would be what type of bridge they want. The design would be done by an architect. He will draft all the plans of what the bridge will look like, and the road access and the likes. The build would be a construction build. The test, we will test the bridge solidity, be a stress test, but also I assume there'll be tons of other tests. And the implementations, yeah, is the cars are allowed to go on the road. We take a bit of a closer to home type of project, going on holidays. What are the requirements? We need a break. The design will be preparing the itinerary. The build will be to make the bookings. And the test, can we test the holiday? I wish we could. And then we would go into implementation, which is the holiday start. So maybe the only component that doesn't really work is a testing part here. Landing on the moon. Let's get carried away. The requirements, we want to go to the moon. The design would be the design of rocket, I think. Obviously I don't work for NASA, so I don't really know, but the build would be a construction as well. And the test, well, you would think that they would do a lot of testing, but how do you test going on the moon? Maybe they would test just the smaller components, but not the final component. Maybe they would have some test rockets. So if you work on a project like that, let me know how you test. And the implementation will be 3, 2, 1, go. So obviously bit of a lighter topic here, but this model looks like it works on most projects. Let's continue with project planning scheduling. I have some suggested steps to build a schedule here. Step 1, 2, 3. Obviously, I think that building a schedule is quite intuitive. I think we all know about project duration, dependencies. We have all planned something somehow, if only the holidays as well. I'd like to give this example. It's everybody hopefully has done that at some stage. Step 1, we list all the tasks required alongside with the effort required. Effort is the amount of time that would be actually spent on doing the work. The duration would be the time spent from start to finish. So you could have some delays, some wait times in between, so that will be taken into account during the duration. Here's a quick example here for you. Take the builders 2 hours to fix my roof, but if you take into account all the going back and forth, it would take them 2 weeks, the duration, but they will be actually working on my roof for just 2 hours. So if we go back to our example here, it's building a fence with a gate. So you would list all the tasks that, and please don't comment on those, just assumption that what is required. So 0.5 days to build the material, 3 days to install the post, 1 week to put the fence up, and 2 days to build and install the gate. So we start off with listing all the tasks. Step 2, we list the dependencies between the tasks. We review the tasks that cannot start before another one is complete. So for instance, we cannot start building the fence prior to getting the material. We cannot put the fence up without building the material. So we cannot start putting the fence without the post. So we cannot do this without the post. So we list all the dependency between the tasks like this. I have a comment here as advanced. Sometimes the relationship can be between tasks can be more complex. For instance, some tasks that can start a few days after another one has started, or some tasks I need to finish at the same time. An example is we need to finish the fence at the same time as our neighbors finish his, because we want to make sure they're exactly on the same height, for instance. So that's more a bit of a complex dependency that we can have. So this is where I put as advanced. If you're a beginner, you don't really have to worry about this scenario at this stage. Step 3, we put it all together. We review the resourcing and a constraint for those tasks. Who is doing those and how many resources do we have available? And this is where I was mentioning before, effort and duration as two terms that are often used in project management for the scheduling. Effort is actually the time to actually do the work, and duration it's the time that it will take, taking into account all the dependencies, the constraints, and the like. So for instance, what I have here, let's have 1 week to buy material, as we need to find the proper wood, the shops might not be open, and the like. So this is to show you that 0.5 days task can turn into a 1 week task. And this is what would happen in project management as well. Some task could have 1 day effort, but on the plan you would put 5 days because the resource is not often available, works part-time or the likes. It will take in fact 2 weeks to put the fence up as the contractor is working part-time. So 1 week effort, but the duration will be 2 weeks. A resource might not be available, so that's more a constraint, if you like, until a certain date. So you list your constraint. Shops are closed during the Easter break, contractors away all May. So you can list them, and after it might not be a problem. You might finish the project before, or the project might start after. 2 resources available with the same skills could work on the same task, so that's more positive situation. Something to bear in mind when you put your schedule is a second resource will be available from the 10th of May. And then you list all other constraints. You know, the fence needs to be built by the 12th of June. That could be a type of constraint. So that's it. Step 1, the effort. Step 2, dependencies between those. The dependency is required because when you have a look at the resource and constraint, then you need to take those dependency into account. So that's just an example on how you could go about building a schedule. And how would you represent this? You can just represent this this way to the business. I've taken all the effort and duration into account, and assuming project start at 2nd of March, I've put all that together, and that'll give me a completion date. It's a small schedule, but it would just to illustrate the 3 steps that I had before. We will see other ways, obviously, to present a schedule, but this type of schedule, as we'll see, it's quite good to present on a very high level to the business. Hello again. So let's review some schedule tabs that you could come across. So I have represented here 2 schedule tabs that are quite common. They focus on milestones. So the first one is called the milestone view. We just list the tasks and then we put their completion date here on the right hand side. So usually you would have all your key important project tasks and when they will complete. That gives stakeholders an idea of when some key milestone will be completed. The second one is a project timeline. It's a little bit similar. It focuses also on milestones, but it's a little bit more visual if you like. So there's the completion date here, the 30th of December, and the name of the task is here. So it's quite user friendly. So I've done this one in Microsoft Excel. I think it can also be done in Visio. So let's review the advantage of this type of schedules. So they are great for management or steering committee reporting. Obviously, they very easy to read and they focus on the key components. They are easy to include in reports. So you can just copy this and put it at the end of your report. So that gives you everyone an update on the schedule. And also with the project team, they are better, I feel, to get people motivated and focused on the tasks at hand. So the Gantt chart that we will see on the next slide, it's more complete, more detailed, but I find that your project team sometimes struggles a bit with it. They don't have the time to go into the more detailed tasks. So that's perfect to get everyone focused. Okay, so the software development here needs to finish on the 2nd of February. And that gives everyone a bit of a goal and a clear view on what needs to be achieved. So the other type of schedule that you will come across definitely is a Gantt chart. So the Gantt chart is the gold standard, I suppose, for project management scheduling. It allows for complex dependencies and even, you can even do your budgeting with it. So this is what it looks like. So on the left hand side, you have project tasks, and on the right hand side it's a bit of a more visual way. Going back to the left hand side, you would list your tasks here. You can group them. For instance, you could have the planning grouping and you would have all the tasks for planning, execution, all the tasks for execution. You would have the effort that I discussed earlier. You could put the duration instead of the effort. You can put resource names. You can allocate a resource for this task and for that task, and the software will let you know if a resource is double booked, if it's allocated to more than 100%. So it's quite a good tool for the project manager. Let's have a look at the pros. Yeah, it's great for complex project. Calculates the completion dates based on dependency, so this you don't have to do it all manually. It's all calculated. On the downside, it can look a bit overwhelming, as I mentioned on the previous slide. So with business and project teams, so I would, if you want to use it as a tool for communication, I would strongly recommend to keep it to 1 or 2 pages, because I've just represented one page here. I more or less here have one project on one page, but sometimes there would be 10, 11 pages, so it's a bit unreasonable to ask a project team member to review it, and for you it's becomes a bit of a maintenance nightmare. So the tool that we use for this type of schedule is a Microsoft tool called MS Project, a Microsoft project. But you can also do it with Microsoft Excel, and I actually show you an example in the resources. Talking of resources, here we are. So I have included one of these Gantt charts in a resource done with Microsoft Project. So obviously, if you don't have Microsoft Project, you won't be able to access it. So for that reason, I've also put it in a PDF format. And I've also provided an example of a Gantt chart that has been done with Excel. So if you go into Excel, if you want to create a new workbook, and you go into the templates and you scan for Gantt chart, you will be able to find some Gantt chart templates that you can use. So that's if you're really keen, that's if you really want to play around with Gantt charts. But obviously Excel doesn't have the same calculation advantages that Microsoft Project would have. So that's it for project scheduling. Next, let's go into planning for our project cost. Welcome back. Now it's time to put a complete budget together. So during initiation, a high-level cost was estimated, and we called it the order of magnitude. Now we are in planning, and it's time to go more granular. So we do a bottom-up estimate, which means that we add all the smaller components that we would have found when we did our schedule and our design. So we would know all the cost attached to each one of those components. So we do this after the schedule is completed, because some costs will be dependent on the length of the project. For instance, the project management cost. It's usually more expensive if the project is longer, because it's based on the number of days that the project manager will be involved. And once these project costs are finalized, we refer to this budget as our baseline. And during the life of the project, we will be always referring back to that baseline to check if we are still within the budget boundaries. So when we get started to putting our costing together, one way to go about it is to make it, I suppose, clearer, is we would split our cost into time and material and fixed price. So just to give a quick explanation on each one of those. The time and materials, the cost calculated is depending on how long the project or the task is going to take. So we're not really sure. It could take 10 days, it could take 20 days. So we would have to make an estimate on how long it would take to finish the task. But if it takes longer, it will be more expensive. If it takes less time, it will be cheaper. So we don't really know. So we say it depends, more or less, in time and material there. So this is why in this example here you would have the contractors. You bring someone in for $1,000 a day. If he finishes the task in 4 days, it's 4,000. But if he finishes it in 6 days, it would be 6,000. So obviously you would have some type of estimate, but it's not really fixed, the price. The same as we discussed for the project management cost. It depends on how long the project is. Functional managers, it could depend on how involved they get. If the project get more complex, maybe they would get more involved, and you could require some ad hoc consulting as well. In the middle of the project, you might realize you need something, and then you would bring him or her as time and material. And also the purchase, you don't really know sometimes in advance how what procurement activities will take place. So it's all a bit vague here, but you would always come up with some types of estimates. The fixed price, it's more concrete. You know exactly how much you're going to have to pay upfront. So if we look at examples, hardware purchases, so that's one that we know we will be needing, so we know in advance how much it will cost. You can have a fixed price on your traveling. If you know you need to travel for the project, you can calculate it exactly in advance. You can have also some type of service that it's fixed price. Someone comes to fix something, it doesn't matter if it takes them 5 days or 10 days, you would pay only the same price. And for some goods as well. So here are only examples. So those, it's just some examples that I put here, but obviously you could have a bigger list. So maybe just to wrap up with a very quick example is that, let's say you go on holidays. Before you go on holidays, you know, some costs would be fixed. You would have paid for your hotel, say, you would have paid for your flights. That's fixed price. But some other will be more time and material, if you want to call it this way. For instance, the meals, you don't know exactly how much you will be spending at every meal. You don't know how much petrol exactly you will spend, but you would have an idea. You would make an estimate. You would say, well, $50 a day for 4 meals, for instance. It's still considered a time and material because you don't know exactly in advance. But you would have some type of estimates to give you an idea. So this is obviously the cost to keep an eye on. So if you look at the vendor-client environment, so it's the time and material is obviously preferred when you are the vendor, because if it takes you longer, then you get paid, and therefore you're covered in a way. On the other hand, the fixed price will be the one preferred by the client because they know exactly how much they're going to pay in advance. So to reiterate a bit regarding this fixed price and time and material concepts, I wanted to give you an example. So if those concepts are clear to you, feel free to skip that video, but I always like to provide an example. So if we go back to the fence, building a fence example, you could have potentially 2 options or a combination of the 2. Let's go for option 1. Option 1, you decide to go fixed price, or the contractor gives you fixed price. So the total budget is clear. It's priced for all the wood, nails and post. It's all fixed, and the labor also is fixed. It will not cost you more than this. So as a client, you know that the price and will not go above this amount. I mean, there's always exceptions, but this is the idea of the fixed prices. In theory, you stick to this price. So as a contractor, you could potentially have a greater margin if if this was a bit of an estimate and you have a dream run, and then you have a little bit of money left. But if it takes you much longer, then you could potentially lose money. So you could go also with option 2. With the time and material. So either they could tell you, look, I have no idea, but our labor is $50 per hour. But usually, as I was mentioning, they would give you an estimate. They would say, oh, around $2,000, but it will be time and material anyway. So rest assured that you will not pay more than is required. So as a client, you are unsure really how much it will cost in the end exactly, but you have more confidence that you will pay the right price. As a contractor, you do not have the same pressure to potentially losing money. So if there is a problem and the job takes longer, then you still pay on a hourly rate. So these are the 2 options that you could potentially have. There's a third option. You could decide to have some fixed price and some time and material. Like for instance, the contractor could tell you, we'll give you all the materials fixed price, so that's $750. You know how much exactly you're going to pay for those. But we will have the labor as time and material. So we will give you $50 per hour for that. We will charge you $50 per hour for that. Welcome back to the course. Let's have a look at a project budget example. So what I have here is a bit of an example of a simple project where you would have project management and coordinator and a developer and a tester. So obviously it would be more resource involved, but I just wanted to give you a very simple example. And I wanted to split it between time and material and also in a fixed price. So you would have the time and material, you would have the estimate of how long the project is. So you would have the 50 days here, so that would be the length of the projects multiplied by the rate, and you would have a cost here. So for time and material, as I was saying, this is just an estimate. If the project takes longer, then your your cost will increase here. Time and material, again, if the estimate is wrong, then this could increase if it was underestimated. So all those resources have a number of days, and now you have the rate per day, and I give you a total cost. So that cost hopefully will not change, but if there are, if there are events that goes in the way of the project, if there are issues, then this cost could change. So in a fixed price scenario, then that's you're more confident of those. So the purchase of server, it's going to cost you $20,000. You know it. Security testing is going to cost you $10,000, and you know it. So this is how you would put your budget together. You would add all the time and material, and you would add all the fixed price, and I would give you the total estimation. The danger zone, time and material, so that's the one that you need to keep an eye on. Could potentially be an opportunity if things take less time than planned, but that's your starting point. That's another example that I wanted to give. I've put it under the advanced category. Feel free to skip it. It's called the schedule-based budget. So instead of giving your finance department a bulk cost at the end of the project, you actually split it on a monthly basis. So this would look something like this. So let's assume we have time and material here, and you would have every month here. You would have an estimate for units to build. You have 75 units, and you have an estimate of $1,000 per unit that you build. Obviously, being time and material, this is just an estimate, so it could cost more to build 10 units. So how does this work? So you would tell your finance department or whoever, your management, you would say at the end of January I would have spent 10,000, end of February 20,000, end of March 30,000, etc. till the $75,000 at the end of the project. Sometimes the finance department only free up the money on a monthly basis, so that would be handy for them. Instead of handing you the 75,000, they would just drip feed you every month. So here we have production is planned to increase for April, so therefore your total cost for April will increase, and then you would reflect that on your monthly payment day. And that's the overall project budget. So the difference with this budget example and the one I provided earlier is that we provide a monthly estimate of how much the project will spend, and as you'll see, it's quite convenient when we are tracking our budget. So in other words, end of February you can check how much you have spent and compare with this amount, and that will be more accurate instead of only comparing with the final cost of the project at the end. So during execution we will review how we can track these types of budget. To finish on costing, a quick slide on contingency. So sometimes when you put your budget together, you can push for some contingency funds to be added to your budget. So you might be okay to do it, but they don't always allow you to do it. So there are mainly two types of contingency money that you could get. One is a risk contingency, the other one is estimate contingency. So in your overall budget, you would have your base budget plus the risk contingency and plus the estimate contingency. So the only thing is you cannot access those under certain conditions. So the contingency for risk, you will only be allowed to access it if the risk realized and you had some action that actually cost money to fix the risk. And the contingency for estimate, so that's more a contingency if you are not very confident with your estimate. let's say it's a technical project and your technical team has provided you with an estimate, but they are not extremely confident with it because it's a bit of a green field for them. They have never done it before. So you could go and say, well, this is my budget, but I would like to have 10% on top because of this component here that is a little bit scary, and we are not fully confident. So I think sometimes it's a good way just to reduce your budget instead of going the full Monty and having these two together as your baseline. You say, well, I will go for this budget, but just as a heads up, there is some contingency here that I might need. So that's it for the contingency. Welcome to the quality part of planning. So most of the times teams know what they have to do to ensure the quality, but the challenge is that quality can be quite subjective. So therefore we need some way to measure if what we are doing or what we'll be delivering is of quality. So we need to ensure that the final product and also the delivery process will be of quality. So during planning we state what we will do to ensure that the quality across the project, what actions we will be taking. The outcome can go either in a quality plan, as mentioned, or it can go just as a section in a project management plan, which is more common. So planning for quality, how will we achieve it? So the way I see, there are two key components involved in planning. We need to ensure that the process and the controls are in place. Even as a project manager, I need to ensure that I'm following my own process, so that will ensure quality to the project, and at the end, hopefully, that can reflect back to the quality of the final product. So in order to check if process and controls are in place, we could ask ourselves the following questions. We could ask ourselves which process and controls we'll be using. So we could list those, and that will make everyone feel more confident that the quality will be applied. And we could also ask ourselves, are they sufficient? Or do we need to set up additional processes and controls? So for instance, we could say the change control process will be used to avoid scope creep. Make sure that we don't go out of scope. And if we want to go out of scope, we will just have the change control process to keep us in track. We could say the budget will be reviewed monthly. We could say we would review all the process 1 month into the project to ensure that they are still valid and they are efficient. So that's we don't want to reinvent the wheel here. We have usual procedures that we want to use, but it's always good to have a fresh look at those and to confirm they are still valid. Another part of planning for quality is testing the final product. So it's good to have all your process and controls in place, but the final product needs to be of quality as well. This is what the stakeholders want at the end of the day. So what questions do you ask yourselves? How will we test the final product? So usually you would have a test team and they know what they have to do, but it's always good to say if there's different type of strategy or if external teams will be involved for this. What are the criteria that will satisfy us? The final product is of good quality. So at the end of the project, we need a way to say, yes, this is exactly the final product that the client or the business or whoever wants. So we need to have some type of acceptance criteria. So here we stipulate which test team will take place. What do we do if the test fails? There's probably a process. If the testing is not good, we send that back to the build team and the like, so we can specify all that. So in your project management plan, you could have statements like testing will be outsourced to the company XYZ. XYZ will provide a weekly report on testing. XYZ will provide a test plan and that the organization can sign off on, and the acceptance criteria of the final product will be that all testing is completed with only minor issues. So once you list all that, everybody, is more confident that you would have a quality product towards the end. So having a quality product doesn't mean having a solid product, but it also means that it's actually the product that the business wanted. So here in our project management plan, we could have the testing will be outsourced to company XYZ. We could say XYZ will provide a weekly report on testing. We could say they will provide us with a test plan that we will be reviewing. And here we could say that the acceptance criteria would be that all the testing has been completed and then only minor issues left. So the final word on quality, if you like, is in theory, the project manager role in quality is not to perform quality. So you don't go to the team and tell them, show me what you have done so I can check it. So you would be more asking questions, what have you done to ensure quality? Have you followed your testing processes and the likes? Show me the outcome of your test results. So if you see something, by all means go. Sometimes it's a website development that has actually happened to me. Check the work the guys have done and realize that I saw a few defects already, so I just mentioned it to them. So if there's something really obvious, glaring, yes, of course, do it, especially if you have time. But if not, you just need to ensure that the quality is being applied. So here on this slide, I have listed all the, not all, the main types of testing that you could come across. And I just wanted to give you an idea. That's a way to test the final product. There are sometimes a lot of testing that can occur. So this way, if you hear about those words, terminology, you'll be familiar with them. Starting from the top, and I've put some green stars here to highlight the key ones. Starting from the top, you would hear the system integration testing, or SIT. So that's usually done for software development projects, and you could develop a software, it could work perfectly, but if it doesn't integrate well with other internal or external software components, then that's not good. So an example, if you test a new accounting software, if it integrates properly with legacy applications. So you don't get too concerned with this. I've put it under the advanced slide. It's only for your information at this stage. Now the next type of testing, which is more common, I suppose, it's called either the functional testing, the system testing, or sometimes it's just called testing. So it's usually done by a specialized team, a test analyst, and they check the final product works properly before handing over to the business. So they have test scripts, and it's more formal testing than what a business would do at the end. They are a team of specialists, so they know what they do. So in other words, it's very good to have that done before the business comes into play. As an example, the test team could check the navigation of a website is working as designed. They could check all the links one by one are working properly, so all the functionality will be working. So the user acceptance testing, so that's when the final testing takes place before we can release most of the time. So the business would come in, we would give them for the scenario of a website, for instance, we would give them access to our test environment, and they would come with their test scripts, and they would check if the software is actually what they required. So they check that the product meets the expectation and requirements before we go in implementation. So an example, they could check if the correct price has been calculated on the product sold on the website. Next, those are slightly different, but I put them all into the categories more resilience, stress testing, performance testing. You want to check the final product is robust enough under extreme conditions. For the website, you would simulate a lot of people using the website. For the bridge, which is an example here. You would bring, I don't know if you've seen this, but they bring 50 huge trucks on the bridge to ensure the bridge is solid enough. I don't know what would happen if it's not if it's not enough. So I think they probably know what they're doing. So that's another type of testing that you could have. There's also the production verification testing called PVT, or production testing, or post-implementation testing. So let's take the example of the website that, let's say you go live on one day, and the morning when you're live, the users come in as an external user, and they would check that the website is working properly. So the system is live, but still the final testing before everyone gets in. So check the implementation of a software live works as it did in test. So a website going live, but only a few users can access it. So that's the scenario I was just referring to. So as mentioned, there's plenty of type of testing that you could come across. There's unit testing. So this is usually done by software developers, and when they do their own testing prior to giving it to the specialist team. So you might hear that, but it's more or less developers doing their own work. You could also have penetration or pen testing, which is quite popular at the moment. So it's to ensure that the website cannot be hacked. So it simulates a cyber attack, and check if that it cannot be attacked, that the website is safe. Release testing also, you might hear that. So that's more it's final testing that we do before a software is released. So if you're a bit overwhelmed, just bear in mind these two. You will just call them the testing itself and the user acceptance testing. I just wanted to show you as well what it would look like on the software development project that you would have. So here you have all the planning. Here you have the execution, so which is the design, the development, and then you would have all the testing. And I just wanted to show you where that would fit in. The first testing that you would have would be here. So the team would be doing this development at this stage, and then after you would have the system testing. And after this, you would have the business. They would come and do their user acceptance testing, which is here. This one. Here you would have the penetration testing. Usually it's being done at the very end, when there's no more software change being done. So they want to check that the website is safe. And then, just before going live, you would do your post-implementation testing, PVT or production testing. So you see that quality in a project can occur at several times. Not only you have your recurring process and control quality to be put in place, but also you have some key milestone here around each type of testing. Welcome back to the course. Project planning comes to an end. So we'll have a look at examples. So we'll have a look at a project management plan example. I'll have that on 2 slides. It's more or less to review all that we've seen during that phase, and just to give you a bit of an idea, as we did at the end of initiation. So the project is building a bridge. So we would have a scope statement, a little bit similar to what we had in initiation, but we'll go into more detail. I just have here build a bridge. The job includes all elements of the bridge, but excludes all traffic lights. That will be done separately. So you would go into more granular, and you would have more bullet points in this high-level scope. But obviously, at the end of planning, you would also have all the business requirements. So the business requirements don't come from this document here. They will be provided separately. So you can refer, if you like, in the scope statement, saying the scope is all the business requirements that we have produced separately. critical success factor, what we could have is, for this project to be a success, we want the bridge to be ready by the 1st of February 2022 or the 2nd of January 2022 if you read the dates the other way, with little disruption to traffic around the building site. So this is clear, has to be done at that date, and we don't want any disruption. So the project team know what they have to do. The project approach, the work will be primarily outsourced. We'll be hiring a company XYZ to do the work. A consult PM will be coordinating the work. Testing will be outsourced to company ABC. So that's giving you the high-level approach on how we'll be progressing with this project. And this document, if you give it to executives, they would know how we will be doing it. So this is useful for them. If we have some constraints, we can list them as well. The construction should not interrupt the current traffic. That was also mentioned in a scope statement. The bridge must be operational by 1st of February, so that's also part of the critical success factor. So if you have any constraint, things that are preventing you from going as smoothly as you would like, you would list them here. Deliverables, a bridge. But we go a little bit more granular. We also want, as part of the deliverable, all the operational instructions. We want a maintenance schedule to use after the bridge is completed, and you can list them all. You can go crazy. If you are business, you want to list here of all that the project will give you at the end of the project. The schedule. You can insert the milestone view here. What I would do is I would put the milestone view here, and depending on where you work, sometimes they're interested in a more detailed schedule, so you could attach your Gantt chart towards the end. This will have to be signed by the business, so the business wants some confidence that you will be meeting your time frames, and the best way to provide them with confidence is to give them a breakdown of the tasks and by which date they will be completed. Continuing on the project management plan, the budget. So here you have a very detailed budget, so you can provide them the detailed budget, but in this document you can give a summary. You can say the total cost is such and across 2 years, and then you refer to the budget breakdown and the time frames if it's a budget based on the schedule. The quality, you can make some statement here, or you can refer to the company's quality management plan. But you could say things like, the company ABC, which is the company we have hired to do the testing. ABC will be ensuring the bridge will be tested to best practices and will present a testing strategy for approval. You could also say that ABC will be testing to give us the green light for when the bridge is ready to go. That's clear. So when the business sees that, they'll say, okay, that's okay. It looks like this has been taken care of. Stakeholder list, so you could duplicate the stakeholders list that you had in your project charter, or you could be more granular if there are any changes and the likes. You could list them here. Communication, you would have your communication plan, or if not, then you can just let them know when project updates will be sent. You can mention if there's a steering committee, and you can also mention that the outsourced company will be providing their weekly reports to your project manager, and the project manager will escalate any significant issues. Risk register, so we already have a risk register from the initiation phase, so we can refer to the risk register here, and we can say, well, we have noted another risk. The contingency money for this risk has been included in a budget, if that's the case. So you can provide a few sentences here on the risk. And then you can mention any other planning document, procurement, communication, human resource, anything that can, the way I see this document is anything that can make the person who will be signing this document feel better. You list it here. Existing procedure will be followed. No other planning document will be required at this stage, but the project will add some if required. So that's it for the example of the project management plan. You can have a look in a resources. There is also a draft template, as I was mentioning, but it's just to show you that the project management plan can stay very simple. Obviously, depending on where you work, if you want to go into project management, you would not come up with your own template. Usually, they would have their own templates, and you would have to use them. But it's always good to have an example somewhere. So there you go. So that's it. We finished with project planning. So to summarize, project planning, be as thorough as possible to avoid any surprises during the execution of the project. In initiation, we needed to have the big chunks right. In planning, we need to be very granular, very meticulous. We need to make sure we have everything planned very thoroughly. So the more thorough we are, in theory, the easier the execution will be, and the less surprises we will have. We will always have surprise in execution, but the idea is to reduce the amount of surprises that we could have. So ensure that the requirement are as precise as can be. So that's something that sometimes is difficult to get control of, because the requirements come from the business. In a way, it comes from outside the project team. So this is why you have to be a bit thorough with us, and when they give you requirements, you check with your team, is that good enough for us to get started in execution? So get everything signed off before you get into the next phase. The requirements, your project management plan, make sure it's signed off by everyone. So there's often pushes to start execution as soon as possible. So use your common sense there. You don't want to sound too anal and say, no, I'm not going to start execution until everything has been signed off. And I don't think you'll come across as someone very flexible if you do that. But use common sense and stress that sign-offs are really critical. So now there's only one thing left, more or less, is to do the work and do the execution. But before we do, don't forget the quiz, and I'll see you at the other side of this. Welcome to Phase 3 Execution Section Overview. So as usual, we will start off by providing the purpose of the execution phase and also the project manager role in that phase. And then we will discuss the following activities: schedule management, scope management, issue management. We will have a closer look on meetings, reporting. We will also have a look at cost tracking and a very specific component of cost tracking, which is earned value, which I have flagged as advanced because it's not always present in project management, but I suppose it's something good to know. And finally, we will wrap up on this phase, and there is a quiz as well. Welcome back to the course. The wheels are in motion. We've had our sign-off in planning, and now we can do the execution. Planning has been done. This phase is more about monitoring, controlling, fixing issues, and reporting progress. Let's have a look at the key components. Of course, we'll have to do some coordination, so that depends on the maturity of the teams. Sometimes it can be very easy, as the teams are used to work together, so they coordinate between themselves, but sometimes a more hands-on approach has to be done for the project manager. Reporting, very important to report, so that has to be done usually on a weekly basis, but sometimes fortnightly, so it depends on where you work if you're a project manager. Quality control, making sure this is taking place. Have a look at your processes. Communication, make sure that everybody, all the stakeholders are being communicated to on how the project is going. If there are some purchases, reviewing the risks as well. This has to occur. Managing issues, of course, we'll talk a bit about that later on. Monitoring the schedule and costs. So that's one of the key components. We'll review the 3 key components in just a minute. And a review. Project management is not just about rolling tasks. If you feel that the trend is going in the wrong direction, or if there's some strategic changes, this is where you really make a difference and say, well, hang on a minute, is it still worth doing this? And then at the end of all that, you do some implementation. So it's just a snapshot of the key component. It all depends on the type of project, the amount of work you will have, but this is a good summary. But if you are still daunted by this list, let's review the 3 key components that I believe you'll be involved in as a project manager. So the first one is reporting, not negotiable. This has to happen. If there's only one thing you do during the week, is to do your reporting. If you don't report on time, your management team, the business, project office, or whoever would think that you're not on top of your project. So this is my advice. Reporting goes first. It's tempting to say, well, if I do reporting, I don't have time to do anything else. And I hear a lot of that from project managers, but put that aside. Trust me, reporting goes first. Second thing is managing issues. You might have a lot of issues, you might have less issues, or you might have issues that don't need management because the team is mature and they know how to fix it, and they have processes in place and the likes, and they are quite self-sufficient, but sometimes this is where you spend most of your time. And finally, I haven't listed coordination, but monitoring the schedule and the cost, it's something that obviously you have to do. So you have some, either you use your Gantt chart, or I prefer to have a more granular task list so I can really tick them off as I progress. But those 3 activities should keep you busy during execution. Let's review quickly the role of the project manager in execution. So it will be a bit of a repeat of the previous slide, and this is what I want to go through this one quickly. We saw all the key components of execution, the project manager being involved in all components. Then that will be very easy to guess what is the role of the project manager in execution. But before we start, I just wanted to mention that sometimes execution is a bit of a smoother ride for project managers when there's no issues and the likes. But regardless, this is the phase of the project where the project manager is the most in view. So when anything that happens on the project, closely or from a distance, the project manager will always be the first point of contact. Actually, if something happens and you're not the first point of contact, they could mean that there is something wrong in the project. You should really be the first point of contact. Having said that, let's go through the role. Coordinate work between teams, we saw that. Monitor the schedule and budget. Alert, let people know there's a slippage. Report on it and fix it. Ensure quality is performed. Communicate project progress. Facilitate purchases. Manage issues and monitor risks. So as you can see, it's more or less a repeat of what we had before, but we've reviewed that, and now we can move on to schedule, which is, as mentioned, that's one of the 3 key activities. We are monitoring the schedule. Let's review schedule tracking as part of project execution. So during planning, we created a schedule with detailed milestones and dependencies and the likes. Now during execution, it's just a matter of ensuring those tasks are done. And we just monitor the progress and we address any slippage. Even better, if you can anticipate slippage and prevent them, that'll be very appreciated by your management team. So how do we do this? So I'd like just to mention quickly part 3 of this course. Part 3 of this course will discuss briefly the difference between two methodology, which has waterfall and agile. So for this part here, I want to stress that this is more addressing the waterfall component. Waterfall is more or less when you do just everything once. You only have one planning, one implementation, and the likes. If you are working in an agile environment, you have a different looking schedule. So how do we track this? We use usually a software called MS Project and a Gantt chart that we've discussed in planning. On this slide we have a Gantt chart representation, the one I mentioned in planning, using the MS Project software. I just wanted to mention, to get us started, the critical path and what it is. So critical path is the part of the schedule which, if impacted, the whole schedule will be impacted. So that's the way I like to see it. In other words, it is quite intuitive really that you know that if a task is delayed, the whole project will be delayed. And we would say that that task is on a critical path. Let's review this quickly. So what we had was we were doing the design which was this, we were doing the development which was this, and after we were doing the testing. So if the design is delayed, as this task here comes after and is dependent on the design, then this task will be delayed. And if this task is delayed, then the whole project will be delayed, and therefore the implementation date will be delayed. So in other words, we say this task is on a critical path, this task is on a critical path, and the likes. Now, if there is a task that is not on the critical path, like for instance this one here, that is not on the critical path because there's plenty of time for this task to complete. Let's say the training documentation, the writer of the training documentation is not here, or is or she is sick, or the likes, and he or she is not going to be able to start until that point in time here, this 10 days work. Would that delay the project? Nope, because there's plenty of time. It more or less has until the 26th of July to complete this task, which is the beginning of the next task, because it is a training, requires this training documentation. So I have just one task here that is not on the critical path. All the other tasks, if they are delayed, that would delay the implementation, and this one, if delayed, will not delay the implementation. So that's what a critical path is. Let's continue with schedule monitoring. So I just wanted to show you how, in theory, the project manager can check if a project is ahead of schedule or is behind schedule. So I have a screenshot here of MS Project, Gantt chart on the right hand side, and our tasks on the left hand side. So we have the task names, we have the duration, and we have the percentage complete, and all this updates the start and finish dates. So in order to check if we are on schedule or not, we are having a look at the task here and the percentage completion here. So for each task, we allocate a percentage completion. So here we have this task here, 100% complete, 100% complete. So all the planning tasks are complete, so that means the planning is completed. If we go on execution, we have the design document, 100% complete, so it's done. And development tasks, those two tasks are 20% complete. All the others have not started yet. On the right hand side, on the Gantt chart part of the screenshot, we can check if we are ahead or behind of schedule using today's dates. So today's date is this vertical red line here. And this inside line that is within the bar shows us the completion of that bar. So here 100%, so you see a line through. All these have a line through. So here only 20% of the task has been completed. So the inside line is 20% of the bar. So it takes you here only. When in theory, if you were on time, it should take you just right bang here. If you were ahead of schedule, this inside line should be in the future. So it would mean that. So that would mean that we're ahead of time. So obviously that's all very theoretical. Those tasks being large, you would have on this MS project or on a spreadsheet, or somewhere, the developer would have all his tasks listed and the like, so you could have a more granular and precise way to track. But the idea is on this high level, if possible, to have a percentage completion. So if the team can, they would tell you, well, we are around 20% completed, 25% completed. You would put that in, and that would give you a very quick visual way to check if you're on time or not. So here you would be concerned because we've seen that those tasks are on a critical path. In other words, if they are late, our project implementation will be behind. But this task here is not on a critical path, so it hasn't started. It should have started a while back, but you're not concerned because it is not on a critical path. So you see, you have all this time here to have it completed. So that's just a brief overview of schedule monitoring, how it's done this way. Keep this simple, let's say 1 or 2 pages if you can, and do the rest outside. So this schedule nevertheless is very important because it is a central point, if you want, for the project to have a view on where we are. It's good for yourself, but it's also good for the project team members, for the management team, for the steering committee. It gives them a level of comfort knowing that there is this central scheduling in place. Welcome back to the course. Let's review scope management. So during planning, we have precisely defined our scope. We have business requirements. We have a business requirement document or a requirement matrix or whatever process we used. Now our job during execution is to make sure that we stick to those requirements. We want to make sure that we do not perform activities that are out of scope, because that would most certainly increase project costs and time frames. So we have to apply a little bit of project quality control, and there's a process that we use, and that is called change control for that purpose. So this is, and I will discuss this in part 2, on the interview part of part 2. It is a question that you will probably hear when you go and interviews as project manager. It will be along the lines, what do you do if the business come to you with additional requirements? And here's the answer. So let's have a look a bit more closely at what the change control is. So if there is a change in a requirement, regardless of where it comes from and the reason for it, the project team really needs to assess the impact. And potentially what we call a change request needs to be raised, and that would need to get approval from the steering committee. So I can walk you through the process here. This process is really dependent on the company itself, but I will show you the vanilla version, if you like. So the starting point, we have an additional requirement from the business for whatever reason. The first question we ask ourselves is the requirement small enough? Sometimes it's just so small that, okay, the business forgot to mention that they needed this, but we discuss with the team and they say, oh, this is fine, we can just slip it in and we can just do it. So, and then what you do is you just include the requirement in the scope. this additional requirement? No, it's just very small and you include it in scope. But what I have here is the shortcut is not always accepted. So by your management, by your project office, or they say, oh no, this is small, I don't care, that they didn't want it. They're going to keep coming with a small requirement otherwise. So that depends a lot on where you work. It's a good, I think it's a good way for, as a project manager, to show that you're flexible. Yes, it's a small requirement, but we can slip it in, so it's good for your relationship with the business. But at the same time, if your management doesn't want to, then you just, I suppose, don't do it. So what happens if the requirement is not small? So the business, we ask them to raise a change request for approval. So the change request is a document, a Word document or whatever that the business will write to formally say, yes, we need this new requirement to be assessed. Sometimes it's not the business, sometimes it's a project manager actually doing it on behalf of a business, but that's not really important at this stage. So in order to do this, yes, so this is a change request that we'll see how we can fill that in simply at the next slide. But it's more or less a document where you input some information on the change that you want. So there is a committee somewhere. It could be sometimes just a steering committee, or sometimes it's just an agreed approver somewhere that have a look at this change request, and it would have the impact on on schedule. Sometimes the impact on cost is going to require more money and the like. So they have a look and they either approve or decline it. So let's have a look what happens when I approve it. So when I approve it, there are two things that occur. The first thing is we include this requirement in scope. So yes, we will be doing this requirement. And what we do is we change our budget. Let's say there was more money attached to this requirement, but it has been approved. So now we're good. We can put more money in our budget, and we can rebaseline the schedule if that applies as well. So we're quickly clean. We had a baseline. Now we do a new baseline because everything has been approved. Now, if the change request is turned down, you just log the change request somewhere. You just file it, and then you don't do anything on this new requirement. So that this has been turned down. So that's a quick overview of what happens. A new requirement could be found for many reasons. The business realized they forgot something, or as part of the more precise work, they realize there is another piece of work that needs to be done. So if it's small, and if you can include it in the scope and just keep working on it. But if it's not small, then you have to have a keep a track of it and have a bit of a log. So you put a change request. If it's approved, you do the change, you rebaseline. If it's not, it stays out of scope. So this is what a change request looks like. Simplification again. This is all you need. Unfortunately, you have to use templates that you are being provided with. So you don't always have to. You don't always have it so simple. But this is the minimum I would recommend. So you have an ID, so that that allows you to keep track of it. You have the name of the requester. You have a description, and let's go with this example of the bridge again. The business said that the bridge needs to have an additional set of lights at the south entrance, and you have reference to more precise requirements, or which type of lights, where they want it exactly, and the like. So this is linking you back to the requirements. As a project manager, you have to assess the impact of this change. So that's your role. The business is not going to do it for you. So you have to check, especially if there is a change in a schedule and in a budget, if you have the resources for it, etc. So here in this example, additional costs and extended time frames as below. That's the impact. Schedule, the project will need another 3 months to deliver. Budget, you need another $20,000. So when that goes for approval, they know how much extra money they would have, and they know that it will take longer to deliver. So when they assess yes or no for that change request, they know they have all the elements in hand to make that decision. It's always good to have options. Now here the options are a bit black and white. It's like either you do it, either you don't. So the option one is do not make the change and postpone the additional required after project implementation. That can be an option. Don't do it at all, could be another option. Or you accept the new delivery date and you accept the expenditure. And then you say the change approved, and obviously which option you have chosen, and then it's signed off. So it's always good as a project manager to try and find several options here. Now here they could have, here this suggestion is to have done, after the project implementation, instead of saying, we don't do it at all. But sometimes there are several options. You can find ways to implement this change with maybe at a lesser cost or faster. If you can bring in maybe more resources or the likes to do the work. So be lateral thinking for option is always good. Welcome back to the course. Issue management, the fun part. So there is kind of a process to manage issue, which is more or less logging the issue into an issue register and manage it to resolution. But there is no really a magic formula on how really to fix those issues. So when the issue is logged, it's more or less up to the project manager to work with the teams, the various teams, to fix the issue. So there's a lot of brainstorming, lateral thinking, influencing that needs to occur for the issue to be resolved. I will show you in a couple of slides the most common type of issue that we have. But before we do that, let's have a look at this tool that we have, the issue register. So once again, this is issue register in its simplest of forms. I don't believe that needs to be more complicated than this. And once I've introduced you to all the columns, I will show you the two most important ones. So first of all, it is sometimes called issue log. I think I mentioned that already, or issue register. There is a template in the resources if you're interested, which is more or less a carbon copy of this. We have the issue number, so we can reference to it quickly, date raised. We have a description as precise as possible, and we have the impact. What is in this impact of the issue on the project? And usually it's a delay in implementation. Due date. When is this issue due to be resolved so that it doesn't impact the project? Sometimes we have an issue, yes, but either the task is not on the critical path or it's not immediate concern. We need to know by when it will become a concern. So this is the due date for resolution for the issue. The owner, very important. We need to allocate someone to resolve this issue, and if at all possible, not the project manager. Why not the project manager? Because the project manager role is to coordinate all activities of the issues and to manage the issue to resolution. But most of the time, the issue itself cannot be fixed, quote unquote, by the project manager. It comes from a technical team, it comes from another team. If it's a resource not available, then it's a resource manager that needs to fix the issue. So the project manager needs to avoid being the owner of the issue. So status, open or closed, the latest update. It's good to put dates. On this date, this occurred, and after you put all the subsequent date. And related risk number, when a risk occurs, it becomes an issue. So for instance, this here as non-applicable, so this issue here doesn't come from a risk. But this was highlighted as a risk initially, and now the risk has occurred, and therefore it's an issue. So this is just a couple of examples. The 1st of Jan, security testing resource won't be available until the 1st of Feb. The issue is it will delay implementation as the testing is on a critical path. The test resource is required by 15th of Jan, so we can still fix it without it impacting the project implementation date. We have managed to get an owner. Yes, so the test manager in this situation, the manager of the testing resource, is the one that is owning this issue and provide an update. Here the test manager is attempting to free up resources. We provide an update by the end of the week. That's good. Second one, third party to provide ongoing maintenance of the website, still not selected. Guys, we warned you during the risk. Now the risk has occurred. So major, because we cannot go live without ongoing maintenance. The due date selection is required be completed by the 29th of Jan, otherwise that will delay the implementation. We managed to find an owner, Natalie, the procurement manager. Need to sort this one out. So it's not just a matter of putting the owner and wait for her here to fix the issue. Obviously, it needs to be managed actively by the project manager. And Natalie provided an update. It's looking good. The company has been earmarked and due diligence is in progress, so due the 14th of Jan. Let's have a look at the two key columns. I'm sure you've guessed them already. So the owner, they need to be reminded that they are issue owners for this and that they have a date, a due date, which is a second most important column. So once you have an issue and you manage to have an owner and a due date, then things are under control. You're not left here as the owner to try and chase everybody up to fix the issue. It has been clearly established that there is an owner and there is a due date. So let's review the most common issue, which is tasks are behind schedule. So this is more or less an outcome, and there's potentially an infinite number of causes for this, but I just wanted to highlight the key one and see if we can address them earlier. So common cause for a delay and how to reduce the likelihood. So if we take them one by one, the first really cause is, the estimate is wrong. So we try and use contingency as much as possible when we provide our estimates. And two, we push the teams to be as detailed as possible. So that would allow them to uncover any subtasks that might not have thought of. So you are more likely to find at that point early all the tasks that are required, but that would or should occur already in planning. During execution, it's too late. The resource not available, that's quite common in when resources are shared. So how to reduce is avoid shared resource. I mean, have your alarm bells as soon as someone tell you, well, you can have this resource, but he or she is being shared with another project or another business as usual team. Avoid if you can, or put that as a risk. I have a shared resource. Also, a way to reduce the likelihood is lock in a resource early and formally. Get it in writing that you can have that resource from that date, from that point in time. Another cause for delay is the resource not skilled for the job. That's quite tricky sometimes, but at the end of the day that will impact the project. So try and discreetly check credentials. Had this resource worked on this type of activities before? And as soon as you notice it during execution, alert as early as possible and put that down as a big risk. Other cause for delay, additional work found. So that's what happens when the detailed estimate and the detailed breakdown of the tasks only occurs during execution. When that occurs during planning, we're still good because we can attempt to change the time frames and the budget, but during execution, it's too late. So there are two causes. That was addressing the first one, detailed estimate in planning. That would reduce the likelihood, same as this one. But additional work found is detailed scope statement would address this issue as well. Well, would reduce the likelihood as well. In the scope, in planning, we mentioned the need to be as detailed as possible. And this is where that would pay dividends under this scenario. So your design team or your development team would say, well, I realize I need to do this as well. I was discussing with the business and they say that needs to be included. And then you're in a difficult situation that if you don't really include this, the business will not be happy. And so therefore you need to be able to push them towards change control, towards raising a change request. But in order to do that, you need to demonstrate to them that what they are asking you now is out of scope and was stated out of scope in a document that you have provided them. Of course, not in those words, but you would be tactful and you would just highlight that to them. Two more things. Use contingency if you can. During planning, mention that the estimates could change and try and get some contingency money. Or if you notice the resource is not skilled, use that as an excuse to get contingency. Whenever you can, obviously, preferably in planning. But even if you do that in execution, it's good because that allows you to anticipate potential delay and try and fix it before the delay is impacting the overall project. Brainstorm the team on the risks that could cause delays. At the end of your meetings, guys, can you think about any risks that could cause delays? And some resource will be more than happy to come with tons of them. Take note of them and just try and sort out the potential dangerous ones. So this is it for issue management. So managing issues is really where you can show off your skills, show off your lateral thinking, get things happening, anticipate problems, and when there is an issue, stay on it until resolution. Let's go to the next part.